salute the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America,
to the republic
for which it stands,
under God, indivisible, liberty
and justice for all.
For a little time delay, Carter, you'll be all right.
Can we get a roll call of the board members, please?
Mr. Seminara. Mrs. Hamill.
Here.
Mr. Kurtz.
Here.
Mr. McCullough here. Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Potts. Mr. Shaheen.
Here.
Mr. Wolf. Here. And Mr. Basil.
Here. Okay, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. It's a budget workshop meeting. We're going to, for the members of the Finance Committee, we've sort of already been through a preliminary run of this budget. This is a benefit to the other members of the board who have not had an opportunity to take a deep look at this and have some questions answered. So the administration is going to go through a bit of a PowerPoint presentation for the benefit of everyone in this room, get a better understanding of where we are with our budget for this year. We also asked, unlike past years, we've asked our administration to provide to us a solution. And they gave that to us in the beginning of November on a way to balance the budget with the resources that we currently have available to us. And we'll be discussing those solutions as well. So I'm going to turn it over to the administration, let them to go through their PowerPoint.
Okay.
And then after that, we'll open up for some board discussion. We may get into some of the spreadsheets that we have available to us if there's some questions on those things. And at the end of the meeting, if there are some questions from members of the public, we'll entertain some of those questions as well. Okay?
Okay.
Having said that, Dr. Otto.
Thank you. Mrs. Penz and I will be walking you through this. Again, thank you all for coming to be informed about this. So I'm going to run through a number of slides here. Mrs. Penz and I will do that together. The first part of this will just be a general overview if you're really not aware of what the budget process is all about. In terms of the process, it started in September by taking requests from all our departments and building administrators. Then we at the central office level compile all the requests and project all of our salaries, benefits, debt service, and other miscellaneous fixed costs. Then we calculate our proposed revenues based on current millage rate, past trends, and current economic conditions, and we also include in our revenue projections every year state and federal funding. In terms of the timelines, the process is driven by Act 1 of 2006, and we started that internally in September. When we asked for district administrators to submit their anticipated needs, according to Act 1, we need to approve a final budget by June 30th of each year. This year, obviously, 2013. Along the way, we have other key dates that must be met based on decisions that will be eventually made by the board from today forward. Act 1 of 2006, to continue that conversation, is the set of regulations from the state that regulates the limit of revenue that any school district can raise. It establishes an index that controls the level of any district's millage increase. The current adjusted index for Daniel Boone is 2.3%, which in theory means that the board can raise taxes 2.3%. Before they would have to go any further, they would have to go to a referendum. So that's kind of the ceiling. So in terms of our economic conditions, I don't really need to go into a long spiel about that. The national, state, and local economies are pretty much still struggling. And we're aware of that, even though there is some recovery on the way. In terms of local comparison, other districts will be facing similar conditions. I would like to say we're about a month ahead of the process, so you might not have heard a lot about what other districts are struggling. The only one that I can offer that I've seen in the newspaper at this point is that Muhlenberg is at about 2.73 in a deficit right now at the beginning of their process. Others are still in the process of formulating their budgets. So I really don't have any other information to share with you on that at this point. I would just say that every school district is very unique in terms of what they've done over, a period of 5 years. So even though you might see some of those, you can't even, especially when you go across counties and the way millage rates work. So you have to be careful when you make those comparisons. All I would say is that at last year at this same point in the process, this day, it was in January last year, we started with a deficit of $3.2 million. We closed that deficit by cutting supplies, staff, and with concessions from contractors, administrators, and classified staff, and in total we made $1 million in staff and program reductions. We used $800,000 of reduction in our debt expenditure through a one-time opportunity that we had to defease a bond payment. For those of you that have been to our meetings, you might be aware of that. And we also used $1.3 million from our fund balance, and there was no local tax increase used last year to balance that budget. So that's kind of an overview of where we are. I would ask everybody, if you have a pressing question, to defer until the end here, but if you have one, certainly you can ask it from the members of the board at any point in the presentation. I certainly don't want to stop that. What I have here for your review is a 3-year budget history summary, we're calling it. Back in 2010, at the time I had said we were at the beginning of a trend. It looked like we were going to be continuing through an era, if you will, of budget difficulties, and that certainly came true. We started that year with a $5 million deficit, which was closed. That's approximate. There was $3.5 million in reductions that year of various sources. A lot of it was staff. A lot of it was other things. That year, the board chose to raise taxes. I believe that was to the index at the time of 0.77 mils. And we used that year almost $800,000, rounded up, in fund balance. So that was year one of this era that we're currently in. Year two, 11-12, we were looking at a $5.5 million deficit that we had to close. We increased our reductions by almost $1 million. We took our tax increase to the Act 1 index again, which, as you can see, went down and is tending to go down. And we used $650,000 approximately of fund balance. Last year, as I said in the previous slide, we had about a $3 million rounded down, $3 million deficit. We came up with $1.7 million in different reductions. Included in that reduction would be the defeasance of that bond. So that's all that stuff is in there, program, etc. Didn't feel the need to detail all that at this point. There was no tax increase chosen by the board last year, and we put on the books that we would be using 1.3 of fund balance. So that's a 3-year budget summary to put everything in context. It's important when you look at this to remember there's a context to all this. One year doesn't exist in a vacuum in and of other years. They're all connected. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Penza to go into budget detail. First, we'll talk about where we are this year. Then we'll talk about getting into our proposed budget. Anytime we're talking proposed, that means next year. We'll talk about our proposed revenues and our proposed expenditures. And I do want to reiterate what Mr. Basil said. The board gave a very clear directive to the administration to take a little bit different look at the process for working on the budget this year. They asked us to come back with a balanced budget if we had to balance it today. We've done that. And just as you look at the things you're going to hear tonight, just be aware of that. That's today. We don't pass a budget on December 6th. Okay, so there's still a lot of work to do. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Penza.
Okay, what you're going to see here is our current budget is $50.8 million. That is made up of 47% in salaries, 19% in employee benefits, 3% in purchase professional services, about 1% in purchase property services, 13% of contracted services, books and supplies is 4%, equipment is actually less than a percentage, and other objects are our interest payments, and other financing are our principal payments on our debt. As I stated, the current 12-13 budget is approximately $50.8 million. That is funded by our current millage rate of the 28.9618, along with state and federal sources. We currently have a staff of 489 employees compared to 493 of last year.
Can I ask a quick question? Will this be posted? Everyone's writing for it to us to try to get these numbers.
Yeah, we'll post this.
We'll post it? Okay.
The next slide is our projection for 13-14. This is in comparison to what I had just gone over for 12-13, proposed for 13-14, our budget is 47% of salaries, 21% made up of employee benefits, 3% is our purchase professional services, purchase property services is a percentage, other contracted services is 12%, books and supplies are 4%, equipment again is less than 0%, and our other objects, again, which is our interest, is 4% of our debt, and other financing is 8%, which is our principal. The total proposed revenues for 2013-2014 are just about $50.1 million. Those sources, go ahead. Those sources are made up, again, of local taxes, states, subsidies, federal subsidies, and self-funded programs. As you can see, there's about $34.3 million of local taxes. That's not just, that's real estate taxes, that's interim taxes, that's interest expense. It's all the local monies that we receive. State subsidies are our basic education, our special education, transportation subsidies, which is right at about $14.7 million. And our federal subsidies are about at $1 million, which is made up of our access funds, our Title I and Title II programs. And again, all assumptions for revenue we've kept everything level funded.
So in a sense, you could look at this as this year's money projected for use next year. So we haven't made any changes in this number because we really don't know at this point. The state has not even begun to release any figures for us.
Well, I just want to make a note. It's not the exact same revenue that we posted for 12-13. I did make adjustments based on historical of things that happened last year for certain things, but there is no tax increase in there, and there is no increase in the state subsidies.
Which are our two big revenue sources.
Correct. The next slide are our proposed expenditures. Currently, our proposed expenditures are at about $55.1 million. The main categories are our salaries and benefits are just at about almost $37 million. Our contracted services are at about $8.8 million. Debt service is just about at $7 million, and our other, expenditures are about $2.5 million. So as you can see there, a majority of our budget is our salaries and benefits.
All right, now getting into some...
Do you want to elaborate real quickly on what contracted services are for the benefit of the public?
Contracted services consist of professional training for our staff. It's where our solicitor's expenses are, our auditor expenses, repairs and maintenance of buildings and equipment. That's where our contracted transportation carriers are. That's where tuition is, which includes tuition for charter schools, special ed out-of-district placements. That's just kind of a synopsis.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, now what we'd like to propose, and again, this is when we're going to take a couple slides here that are going to lead to a slide at the end that get us to the zero balanced budget. This is the first one. This is the revenue side of the budget. In order to do this, in order to balance the budget, the model that the board asked us to have ready now, based on current figures, would require a tax increase at the index of $665,000. I'm not going to read the numbers; they're there for you. We'd have to use both of our exceptions.
We can't see the numbers.
Unfortunately, if you want to move a little closer, you're more than welcome. That's as big as we can get the numbers. I can read them for you. $665,000 would be the amount of tax increase if we take it to the index. Rounding up, an exception for PESers would net us approximately $300,000. Applying for an exception for special ed would net us about $288,000.
And just let me clarify on those two exceptions. Those are the amounts from 12-13 because I do not know at this point what the state is using to calculate them because it's too early in the process. So we just use the same numbers from last year.
The sale, I'm proposing, if need be, that at some point the board will need to consider selling off the transition house. That's the property in front of the school that we had purchased prior. Again, none of these are decisions. At this point, they're really not even recommendations or action items for the board. They are paths to getting to a zero budget. So in June, we may still be talking about this. I'm not going to say that for everything we're talking about, but that's the model for everything that we're talking about today on December 6th. So moving down, the numbers that you see in red, the first number, all of these numbers in red represent revenues that we would lose if we implement some of the things that you're going to see later in terms of staff reductions that we're proposing. So the first one would be Social Security reimbursement would decrease by about $80,000. We would reduce retirement reimbursement by $166,000. Rental income, we get $12,000 a year from the rental of the transition house. That would be gone if we sell it, obviously. Self-funded clubs, we have $19,000 of revenue we would lose. if we were to eliminate all sports, which you're going to see as an item a little bit later, we would lose about $60,000 in activity fees and rentals. And obviously the activity fee and the physical fees would be gone for a total of $139,000. And then to get the revenue that we needed to balance this budget, we would also need to tap $1.4 million of fund balance. So all of these are potential revenue solutions. Remember, the board asked us to get to what we're doing is flipping the process. They asked us to get to the end of the process and work backwards. In a sense, balance the budget first. So these next slides, if we had to balance the budget by tomorrow, these things would have to happen. Okay, it's important that you understand it in that context. Again, based on board and further deliberation, but theoretically they would have to happen. Again, at this point, the board and I and the administration are not making them at recommendations at this point, but it is to start the process. Just if you add, for those of you writing down numbers and figures, if you took all of the tax revenue available to us, if the board chose to do that, and again, that is strictly a board choice, that would be approximately $1.25 million between the index and both exceptions of revenue, which would make up about 25% of the current deficit, which is about $5 million, which you'll see in a little while. Now, on the other side of that, anybody that knows anything about budgets, obviously you have to take a look at the expenditure side. So I'm going to go through these, and I'm going to be very specific about what you're going to hear in each of these categories. I'm going to do them first, then I'm going to come back and tell you what they are. The first one is professional staff furloughs and or demotions. This would include approximately 28 full-time equivalents and will affect in excess of actually 30. It will actually be 40, and I'm going to let you know what those would be if we had to balance the budget tomorrow. That would net us $2 million in savings. The administrative staff, we're anticipating the retirement of Mr. McElmoyle. That's what that represents. He's already told us that, so that would save us $106,000. Student activities, if we were to eliminate all of the student activities, which to get to this zero budget, we did. That would not net us, it would render us on the expenditure side $685,000. We have restructured our use of substitute teachers to save the district approximately $140,000. We have unemployment compensation is in black because that's money we would have to pay out if we implemented all of these furloughs. And we're also looking at the consolidation of a number of bus runs to hopefully save us 2 buses to the tune of $74,000. The bottom line there is $2.6 million. When you add that up with the proposed revenues and the revenue solutions, that brings you to about $5 million, which would close our gap and make it zero. We're going to show you how that happens in a minute. I do want to be a little bit more specific as to the professional expenditure adjustments that we would be looking to make. For the press's benefit, for the benefit of all of you here, it would affect about 40 people. 40. First of all, under the professional staff, we would be proposing to make this budget work today, we'd have to eliminate kindergarten. We would eliminate, which means we would have no kindergarten in Daniel Boone, which you don't have to do by school code. We would eliminate basic skills. There are 3 teachers doing that. We would be eliminating 3 elementary teachers due to decrease in enrollment. We would eliminate the elementary band pullout. That would affect 2 people. There would be a reduction of all of our elementary encores to still leave them intact, but reduce the time they would meet. That would affect 14 people. There would be the elimination of one team at the middle school, which amounts to 4 teachers. There would be the elimination of 2 people at the high school, part-time PE teachers, 1 business ed teacher. We would be consolidating 2 high school science positions and the elimination of 1 school psychologist. In terms of the administrative staff that you see there, I already said what that was, so I'm going to skip that. In terms of the student activities, to remove that from our books would eliminate 2 Act 93 administrators, 1 secretary, and it effectively would eliminate the entire extracurricular activities program, sports and all clubs, which would mean it would eliminate all activity advisors K to 12, would eliminate all coaches middle school and high school, and it would result in the furlough of 1 secretary, the athletic facilitator, and the athletic trainer. Substitute teachers, I talked about that, unemployment compensation and the consolidation of bus runs. We are actually we do transporting children to daycare across the district. We'd be looking to eliminate that bus, and we would also look to have the contractors consolidate 1 other run to help reduce that. That total, again, would come out to $2.6 million. So you can see It's very dire. I would suggest you start writing Governor Corbett, telling him we need more money, and your local legislators. There's some realities here that we need to deal with. So that summarizes. If you take again, we are about $5 million in a deficit again this year. So if you add those two numbers, that's how you solve a budget and make it zero. So on this next slide, and I apologize, it's the best we could do. It's very small, but it is a consolidation. The bottom chart on the left with the blue heading was the revenue solutions that I read to you in that other slide. The chart on the right in red is the expenditure reductions that I just went through. Okay? I'm going to ask Mrs. Penza to kind of review the other three cells that you see there so that you can understand where we are and how we got to zero.
The green cells I had talked about on a previous slide, those are just reiterating again what our local, state, federal, and other revenue sources are. Again, it is based on a zero millage increase, the original assumption, and flat funding from the state and federal sources. On your right, if you want to call it brown or orange, those are our total expenditures. And the key drivers of those expenditures compared to 12-13, what are the key drivers increasing to 13-14, are assumptions for a 6% increase or a $1.5 million increase in salaries, 18% or about $1.8 million increase in benefits, 24% increase or about $300,000 in our purchase professional and technical services, and 22% or about $815,000 in our principal line item. The purple line item that you see is our fund balance, and I just want to kind of go over it because it's maybe a little bit misleading. As of June 30th, 2012, our total fund balance was $4.3 million. However, at that time, we had $195,000 of that $4.3 that was reserved for prepayments. $221,000 of that $4.3 was reserved for grants and our Berks EIT repayment that I think you're all aware of from last year. $1.3 million of that $4.3, if you recall, is allocated to balance the 12-13 budget. So in essence, if all of that $1.3 is utilized this year, our fund balance would be only 2.6, not the 4.3. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
So if we can move to the next slide, what I'd like to do every year, because obviously millage is always a discussion, is to make people aware of what the impact to the taxpayer is if we would have to raise taxes. So the impact of a millage increase, if we were to go to what is the index of 0.67 mils, that would result in an 80, and this is based on the assumptions are at the bottom of the page. These could be a lot more depending on the value of your home. I just don't want to mislead you. This is based on the assumption of an assessment value of about $130,000.
Which is our average.
Which is our average. Thank you very much. So that would result in an $87 a year increase in someone's tax bill for the going to the index who's in that kind of home. $7 a month. Again, $67 of $100,000 assessed value. 1 mil, which would be approximately a middle option, which would probably include one of the exceptions, not exactly, it's just easier to do the math this way, would result in a $130 a year increase in your tax bill, or $11 a month. And if we were to go to the maximum that we could access without a referendum, it would result in a $165 increase, or $14 a month. And again, the assumption is the average assessment, and obviously these figures don't include at this point because we don't know. As you know, the Homestead Reduction Act helps give back taxpayers rebates based on where they are. But I would just ask you, if you double or triple the size of the home or the assessed value, you double or triple those numbers. So don't use those as gospel. They go up or down based on the value of your home. Okay, so if you have a $260,000 assessed value, double that.
Not to mention, if you escrow your mortgage, it's going to go up more than that anyways, because they
right.
think it is 10% more.
Exactly. So I don't want you to say, oh, well, it's only going to be $7 a month. That's just an average. It's important that that's not represented that way. And finally, to bring our portion of this to a close, and then we can certainly open it up for discussion and questions. Potential budget solutions, you okay? We didn't even start the budget yet here. Don't pass out on me yet. There's a we can
water, Danielle?
I have it, that's what happened.
It went down the wrong pipe. Okay, pause for that commercial. All right. First of all, one of our solutions, as always, is cuts, reductions in expenditures. Obviously, the board has at its availability, as we still do have one, it's a fund balance. Obviously, contractual concessions of any kind can help the process. And an increase in revenues, which would be through our state sources, primarily the federal, you can't really ever count on them for money. And the local sources, we can increase our revenues with a tax increase. Just a little editorial on my part. This deficit, and I think future potential deficits, as I think we're in the middle of a long era, can only be solved with the balanced use of all these solution sources, in my opinion, at this point. Over a 3-year period, we have made significant reductions in expenditures in the school district that have impacted program and staff, and thank God we're still, getting the job done. The board has also been responsive to the taxpayers over the last 4 years by not increasing taxes in 2 of the last 4 budgets. And we've used other creative solutions over the last 4 years, and that we've sought to try to solve our budget problems in light of some obvious conditions that are beyond our control and some that are within our control. So for this year and the foreseeable future, it's the recommendation of this administration, I speak mainly for Danielle and me, that we take a look at making use of all of our budgetary resources, expenditure reductions, tax increases, uses of revenues, exercising more control over the portions of our contractual obligations that we can, to the extent that we can. We're going to be trying to work very hard to begin to, Mr. Basil has been, I guess I'll use the word, very adamant about it, about looking forward and trying to project where we would be going. I think we need to be doing more of that as we move forward. But that's the long and short of where we are if we had the balance this budget tomorrow. So I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Basil, for questions from the board and comments.
Let's start with that. Are there any questions from board members or comments from board members?
The amount of money we're getting from the basic education from the state, you didn't increase it, which I understand why, but we're back at the 08-09 level, correct? We're very close to it.
They haven't increased it in 3 years. I think you're right.
Okay.
After the stimulus,
it went back.
right? After the stimulus money went away, it went down to level funding for the last at least 2 years.
Yeah, in 08, we were at 7.8, and we're at 7.8 again this year.
Yeah, the 1 year with stimulus, it jumped up to almost $8 million.
Well, yeah, I mean, it went up, but
It's around $7 million,
yeah.
which is what we had in.
Yeah, it was 7.8. The actual was 7.81 for in.
Yeah, and 785.
Yep.
Projected, so.
Yep.
Did I know a couple of us has talked about this. Have we considered transportation at all? $1.4 million of a budget. We're not required to provide transportation. I know that it's an issue, but we got a choice between removing kindergarten or removing busing. I'd much rather keep kindergarten than remove busing.
I don't know. Without my senses that we have some contractual obligations in that regard, I'd have to
look at our contract.
Have to look at the contract to see. I mean, everything's on the table, obviously.
I would like to look at that because, again, I think if we don't provide it, I don't know how maybe the contract's null and void.
I mean, there are other.
You have to do it for special education.
Yeah, I mean, there are some other ramifications. There's some 2 businesses that provide taxes. There's the IT impact.
Correct.
Most of the people live in the district. There's a
and we do lose reimbursement.
It's not on all $1.4 million.
You'd have to get a net cost to see what that
And then
would
we
be.
got
Because, like
reimbursement.
Kevin said, there's reimbursement that you would lose then,
And I'd
too.
like to know that because, again, I think it's an option. Like you said, I'd rather keep program and then, if possible, get rid of busing.
Well, the subsidy that we lose, right now our subsidy is about half of what our costs are.
Okay,
So if our cost is to transport just special ed, let's just say it's $500,000, our reimbursement would be $250,000.
Okay, but what about general?
What's the code that transportation's for?
It is 7310
So if regular,
Where would I find that on here? Is that
on
under?
state. 7,000 category state. I don't know what you're in.
I'm looking at the expenses.
It's on revenue.
On revenue, first page, halfway down under state sources, special education, 7310, 1.4 million.
I know I did talk to Mr. Subers, and there may be litigation with
That's
the
fine.
contract, so.
But it's still possible.
We can ask the question.
That's the revenue, right? That's the
Right,
revenue.
you were asking, what?
Yeah, so it's, right, so what I was looking for was on the expense side.
2,700.
That's the total number there.
Well, you can't, I mean, what we get reimbursed is the cost from our contractors. In there's also diesel fuel for the busing and all that, so you can't take that total number.
So we're spending somewhere around $3 million less the 1.4. So it's a $1.6 million net.
Again, like Mr. Sheen, I'm not thrilled about it, but it's better than kindergarten.
Yeah, I mean,
better than
there's
sports.
some other alternatives out on the table, and granted, we've got to net out the EIT and the taxes and everything
Correct.
else.
And possible breaking of a contract.
So we'll look at it, we'll have to take a look at the litigation.
I
aspect
think the
of it.
contract, we have to look at it. I think there's an out clause in the contract.
It's on my list.
Dr. Otto, can you please forward the board a better breakdown of what other contracted services and books and supplies and other objects are? Maybe if you can just forward us a spreadsheet, I'd be very curious to see what those items are specifically.
Do you want to answer that?
I don't understand
do
the
the
question
spreadsheets.
because I don't, you mean specific?
I'm looking at the 2013-2014 expenditures by object slide, and on the pie chart it says other contracted services, 12%. I know you mentioned some of that is the retainer for our solicitor, some of it is our contribution to the EIT. I was wondering if you can send, at least me, I'd like to know specifically what those contracted services are and how much they cost.
Well, Connor, it's just the objects. So for contracted services, it's all the 500 objects. So I don't have a specific that this contract equals this amount. I have it.
What you'd have to do, Connor, is take a look at this. If you have some of the other spreadsheets that were provided, you're going to look at actual versus budget expenditures, and where you're going to see some variance reports. So in that particular spreadsheet, we'll show like the last 3 years expenditure budgets, and it breaks them down by line item. And what Ms. Pence is suggesting is you would take a look at all the 500s in those line items, and you would be able to pull out and aggregate what those costs are for other professional services.
Okay, thank you. My other question was about books and supplies. I noticed that instead of 4% number in the expenditures by object, are we going to be buying more textbooks? Are we going to be purchasing more supplies? Is that what is anticipated?
That just means that's 4% of our budget. That overall category is actually down for that budget.
Okay,
And
so this
again,
is, all right. So that is included, but what I'm trying to figure out, once we buy a book, we don't have to pay for it anymore. So this would indicate to me that we're purchasing more things. I'd just like to know what those things are.
Well,
I can't answer that.
in another conversation, Connor, you can certainly call Mrs. Pence and me, and we'll answer some of your questions specifically, and maybe they would help the rest of the board.
Okay, thank you.
There's always going to be some sort of supply cost.
Correct.
I mean, you got
It's
paper,
actually down.
pencils, pens,
Chalk.
Right,
chalk,
there's-
Marker.
Yeah, okay. I'm just asking the question. I'd really like to know.
I can give you more background on that at another time.
Okay, thank you. I'll call you sometime this week.
Okay.
And just to give you a sense, if you look at that spreadsheet that I was referring to, and you scroll all the way down to the bottom, it's in the mid 200s or so. The expenses are actually aggregated for you by those 200, 300, 400, 500 series.
All the way down.
Yeah, all the way at the bottom of the spreadsheet. So, for example, total supplies, the 600s, for our preliminary budget for 13-14 is $2.2 million. For this year, it was $2.2 million. For 11-12, it was $2 million. For 10-11, it was $2 million. For 9-10, it was almost $2.3 million. So it's been relatively consistent, or it has decreased from earlier years. And it's broken down that way also for purchase of professional services, properties, benefits, salaries, all that type of thing. Okay?
I understand that it's going down, and that's a good thing, but I just want to know what we're getting in return for that money. I don't know, maybe I'm not phrasing my question correctly.
Wouldn't have that detail.
Yeah, we can. Why don't we just hook up sometime after the meeting, and you give us a call, and we'll answer any of those other questions that you have.
All right, thank you.
Danielle, as you know, over the last few years, the board has chosen to use fund balance to bridge the gap. What is, I know we're looking at possibly 2.6. What would you feel comfortable in withholding to bridge the gap between the end of June and when the tax revenue starts to come through?
I think over the past couple years, and we can look at it for what just happened this past July, I think we need about $2 million in order to sustain our payroll for the summer and our one debt service payment.
And
Go ahead.
you're talking about using it, Dr. Arnold, how much you talked about using it?
I believe it was
1.4.
1.4.
1.4 of
So
what?
leave us 1.2.
2.
It's a working capital issue. Our revenues don't come in until the end of August, and
Well, I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah,
For the
no,
public,
so what
when you
happens
see
is-
a big number like
Yep.
that.
So
That's
from-
half the budget right there.
what people may not understand is that our fiscal year starts July 1st, and we don't have any money come July 1st. And then what happens is we have a debt payment that we have to make in the beginning of August.
Correct.
We have salary payments that we have to make
Throughout the summer.
throughout the summer for our professional employees. And that net obligation is around $2.1 million for that first 6-7 weeks
Until money.
of July and August. And what happens is about the second or third week of August, revenue starts to trickle in, local revenue for the local state real estate taxes start to trickle into the school district. And by the third, fourth week of August, we have $23 million in local revenues that come in. At that point, we have cash available to pay our obligations going forward for the balance of the year. And then we get our state funding sometime in October, right?
And
I believe that comes in October, late September, October, somewhere in
that
that
starts
range.
to roll in then.
And so traditionally, we've always sort of benchmarked $2 million as working capital to keep in our general fund balance. Now, you can spend that fund balance down to zero, and you'd have to go get what they call a tax anticipation revenue note, and where you are actually borrowing against future revenues. It's a short-term loan. There may be other ways to figure out a way to creatively get through that first 6-8 weeks of the year in terms of revenue.
Yeah, but that is, using the fund balance is a double-edged sword because those funds are not available there next year. And it's, again, probably, if you use $1 million, it's a $2 million swing next year because you've got to replace the $1 million that you didn't have, plus the expenditures that were there. Anyways.
And that's a good point because if some of the public is questioning, for 2012-13, we started with a deficit of $3.2 million, where this year we're starting at $5 million. Well, we knew off of the bat we were going to be $1.3 because of the fund balance we utilized, plus the $800,000 that we did for the bond defeasance. So right there we were 2.1. So 3.2 and 2.1 were kind of at the same level we were
Which is
last
why
year.
in my notes earlier I said that was a one-time opportunity.
Right.
We can't avail ourselves of that opportunity again.
Can we, under your $2 million for the 28 staff, can we have a breakdown of what it is at each building level? Like if it's kindergarten area, I want to know program, because one of the things that was not mentioned yet is obviously there's a large crowd for a budget meeting. Let's do a referendum. Kindergarten wants, the taxpayers want kindergarten. I want to know what it costs specifically if kindergarten goes, so that we can put it out to the public and ask them. If we want sports, I want to know by sport.
The problem with that, the way you're phrasing that, that. Hold on, let me finish. The problem with the way you're phrasing it is you're making the assumption that by raising taxes an additional millage, whatever that millage may be, that millage is now allocated 100% for those expenditures.
It is on a referendum.
On a referendum?
Yeah, on a referendum it is.
But for that 1 year.
That's fine, but I want to know
the
what
following year,
I agree.
it's gone again.
I agree with that, but again.
And so the following year, you're left with the same position.
I could argue the same way raising taxes last year, which we didn't do, and what we should have done this year, we would have only been 4.3 million instead of 5 million. So I can argue that point. So my point is, since these people are here, let's put a referendum. Possibly, I want to know what the cost of kindergarten is. Yeah, it's a one-time fix, but guess what? We might do it every year then. Eventually, it might get voted
I can
down.
answer your question.
Okay.
Approximately, the elimination of kindergarten would result in an expenditure reduction of $437,000.
Okay, so maybe for 1 year, the taxpayers want to say, give me raise my taxes and I'll pay for kindergarten. I don't know. Better yet, even we could put multiple referendums out there. We could put transportation.
We could put a separate referendum.
Absolutely. And again, maybe we're going to be the first district and let the taxpayers decide.
It's a one-time fix.
Absolutely, it's a one-time fix. I never said it wasn't, but depends. Maybe then by that time, things will change. I don't know. No one knows.
Well, we do know. I mean, we do have projections
Yeah,
going
but you don't know what the economy's going to be like in 3 years.
But we know what our expenses are going to be like.
Okay, that's different. But you still don't know what the economy's going to be like in 3 years. No one does. So again, it's a possible. In other words, all I'm saying is it's another viable option that we should have to consider than just cutting everything and.
Well, I would like to see it broken down the way he was originally saying is
Correct.
take each one of these areas that are going to be, especially with the 40 employees, break it down to see how much each one is costing, to see if maybe we can come up with a creative way
Correct.
to keep them without having just a one-shot, one-year deal, and try to re-establish or restructure something to keep them, rather than just always bringing it up to the taxpayer to pay for one thing 1 year. I think we need to restructure rather than just a quick fix.
What she's suggesting is a long-term fix, not a one-time.
Well, I'm aware of that.
Well, again, the long-term fix was we would have raised taxes last year to something.
Well, we didn't,
Yeah,
so
but
that's done.
that's
That's a
gone.
Well,
done deal.
again, but
So
that's-
we're back
that
to
wasn't
square
looking ahead.
one, looking at how are we going to fix it this year, next year, and the following years, instead of like all these little quick fixes all the time.
Well,
We have to restructure.
should have thought
something.
long-term last year.
To go back to your question,
No,
Kevin.
last year was last year.
Yeah, I mean, let's not go
I'm not
where
going
you're
down.
going, because if you're going to go that way, we can talk about lots of things that should have been done differently
Well, that's fine.
in prior years that weren't thought through. Okay?
Okay.
I mean,
To answer-
talk about lots of obligations that were made that were unsustainable. So,
Well, I think it would be helpful to have a cost associated with some of these, well, all the activities, because there may be organizations out there that may choose to fundraise to try to keep a particular one if possible.
Sure.
So I
we
think
can
it's-
give you that exact breakdown. We just,
Absolutely.
for
Yeah, I think the
conversation
public would
purposes
want
tonight, we
to know
didn't do
what
it.
that is.
But it's available.
As I
We had,
recall,
it's what we used to come up with a number. We didn't make up a number.
Right.
I just want to be very clear. We didn't make up a number. This is based on
they
real
raised
bodies.
something like $50,000 or $60,000.
Right. And maybe there's got to be programs that don't cost a lot of money, that extracurricular sports or clubs that somebody feels that I can raise the money and we can save that and be no cost to the district, but still have those things available for the students.
We can give you a cost breakdown to the dollar of all of the things we suggested.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I think that's a great idea that Mr. Wolf has, and I think that could be very helpful, and it can get the community really rallying around these programs. And if they can come to the table and offer up some supplemental revenue to help us, I think that's a great idea.
Can that be, since we're going through a very difficult budget process, could we have that available somewhere on our district website where people can go and take a look at these things?
That's up to the board's discretion.
I don't see any reason why.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Unless I have the
This is another
board-
way to get it out there.
The only, I have one comment. I don't have a problem doing that. The only problem is, and we did that a couple of years ago, we went from full day to half day kindergarten, is if the money's not there, we can't then front the money. You know what I mean? If there's an organization, I don't care what organization it is, and say it's $50,000, if they don't have it when school July starts or school starts, we then can't fund it. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
That's the only thing. Again, I'm not negative. I'm not opposed to it, but there was that to say full day kindergarten a couple years
If you
ago.
recall, I mean, they need to raise that, 'cause they came in with well shortened. Well, is that going to be enough? Can you and you can't do that.
Correct.
It's either got to
Correct.
fall
Yeah.
there.
In other words,
It's a
if the goal was 50 and they hit 40,
I don't
we're
want
sorry,
what
you know what I mean?
What you don't want to do is the programs competing against each other.
correct. That's the other thing.
From a technical standpoint, let me just interject. This information right now, from a right-to-know standpoint, is pre-deliberational. Once you release it, then it's out there. So I won't release it until the board authorizes me to do so. So if you want that breakdown, I'll release it. Until then, it stays here at this table. I can talk about it, but I'm not going to put it out there anywhere unless the board authorizes me to do so.
I don't see any reason why we can't, but we don't have 3 board members here. We can get some feedback from them via email or something else.
At
on what
least
their
let
thought
us
is.
see it.
Well, you can make, obviously, we can make the decision on the 17th at the board
I
meeting.
don't think, personally, I don't think, it's not a secret. I mean,
It's not a secret anymore. I've said
It's not really
it.
a secret, but
They can run those numbers themselves. They know that the largest sports program is going to be football, followed probably by basketball, and they can run the numbers down, and figure it out yourself, ballpark.
I'm not here tomorrow.
It's not a secret.
Well, just a little caveat, to break down all the activities, Mrs. Penza needs a little bit more time to do that.
I can do it high school,
'Cause we
middle
did that
school
as an
rather
aggregate.
easily.
We
but
did
if
that
you
as an
want it by
aggregate.
every single sport, it's going to take me a little bit longer than just,
Okay.
be careful if we do sports, because if we do eliminate them and you put like football back but nothing else, we have a Title IX problem.
I understand.
I'm just asking. I mean, if we do eliminate them, and
Well, we'll
football
have to go
teams
to
and
Mr.
else,
Subers on
I know.
that.
I'm just asking the question now.
I do want to clarify for the public that's here and for the board that the net effect of the sports reduction isn't the $600,000 number that you see. It's approximately $400,000 because there's revenue on the other side that we would lose. So you have to take that off of the other side to balance the equation. So the net effect of the sports and activities is in the $400,000 range.
And this is,
I have a question about that real quick. Are there any specific sports in particular that bring in more revenue than they cost us to run?
I don't know about that, but there are sports that bring in more revenue. Probably football.
Bring in no revenue.
there's
Some sports bring in absolutely
I think-
because they don't charge, like
I think,
cross country or
Mr.
tennis or whatever.
Yeah, Mr. Kurtz, I think it's football generates probably the most revenue,
And then
it's basketball, and then wrestling. I think are the 3 sports that bring in revenue. And there's a breakdown in one of my files here somewhere of what those ticket sales are.
All right, because if
Hamill
some of
has it
these
for her
sporting
REC
events can bring in a net profit to the district, it might be worthwhile to think about, I don't know, I don't want to say keeping them over other sports, but if they're bringing in money to the district to help use to pay for other things, that might be an intelligent decision to make.
Unfortunately,
sport
the
that does.
cost for every single sport exceed any revenue that's generated. And
We'd have to raise ticket prices
not
beyond the point where no one would come anymore.
And then, in addition to that, even if you add the activity fees paid by the individual students in those individual sports, it still doesn't cover the cost. So,
You'd cut the facilitator and the trainer also.
right.
So
Then
couldn't have
you
a sport
can't have a
right
sport.
without- Can you have a
That's the other
sport?
thing is if you only have one sport, what do you do?
No, there is overhead costs, and that would include you would have to have a trainer and a
So you still
facilitator.
have to have that.
And if you bring a football and say wrestling.
So what it sounds like is that there's no way that any organization brings in more money than it costs. That's what I seem to be getting as feedback.
That would be accurate.
That's correct.
All right, okay, thank you.
The activities that cost nothing. There are some sports activities that are out there like lacrosse. I think it's all volunteer.
Self-funded.
That's so
Well,
fun.
That's
yeah,
not-
That would be the same.
And they're not
thing.
reflected here.
Yeah, so those 2
Those are
sports basically are run
tennis
by,
and-
lacrosse and
Right.
tennis are run by the
They're not
athletic
reflected
club.
here.
And so they generate fees and dues from
They're
the
just a
membership, and
They're
then
not
they
a sport.
pay for the coaches and the transportation and all those types of things.
They're clubs. They're not sports. For the sake of fairness, Dr. Otto, when you say eliminate clubs, sports, all that, is marching band in there?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just asking for sake of
I said all extracurriculars.
Okay, I just want to
Are
make
you
that call. I'm just
including
asking the
service
question.
Like National Honor Society and some of those.
Any service that has an paid advisor.
Yes.
I thought, no,
Well, that was before we protected.
correct, okay.
I mean, again, you could selectively protect some of those. That would be the board's discretion. I put
think
them
we
all
need
in
to
one
go
lump
back and
sum.
look at some of these ones.
Service
I mean,
ones.
Service one things, National
Agreed.
Honor Society and some of those.
Agreed.
They pay a due, and it probably offsets pretty close to offsets well, we need to look at that.
I think the one thing and again, it's a minor thing, but if we're thinking about the Rudolph property or whatever we want to call it outside, you got to remember
Transition
you might
house.
not be able to sell that.
That is true.
You can refinance it, though.
Okay, yeah, I know. I'm just saying to you. I mean,
We own that. We have 100% equity in
we do,
that property.
we do. We
so
could
you
actually-
could
yeah, we
refinance
could.
that, pull out
We could. You're right.
$200,000, pay 3% on it, just
Correct.
keep the YMCA
Well, maybe that's
in
an
there,
option,
whoever's in
too.
there.
And just pay the monthly.
I mean, that's maybe an option. I don't know.
Like,
So, but that gives you, again, that's a one-shot deal.
I agree with that.
You're taking
I
200
agree.
grand of equity, you're dumping it into a budget to pay operating costs that come and go, and then that's
again,
gone.
The reason why it's only there isn't too much land adjacent to the high school. That's why we bought it in the first place.
Well, we did use part of it, I think, for the zoning in terms of the parking and all that kind of stuff. We could not have done what we did
Yeah, I think we
for
did.
that other lot.
Yes, it was.
Get a research.
Correct.
It was kind of leverage.
Correct. Okay.
It was leverage for us at the time.
Well,
Anyway,
in terms of setbacks and stuff like that,
Right.
we wouldn't have been able to meet the parking requirements.
I have a question about retirement. What percentage?
16.69 is what they had out there, but recently, as last week, it's not approved yet. It's approved on December 20th. It's going to be 16.93. So the projections that are in here are low, but it was based off of
But they
what...
can change it up till June 30th.
No. The PSERS certifies the rate December 20th of every year.
So then we got
A week.
2 weeks for them to actually
weeks.
lower.
Which,
They could.
well,
They could.
the word out
Theoretically.
there and what I've got is they're
And what
going to
was it last
certify-
year?
This year it's 12.36.
Okay, so it went up. Okay.
It's going to 16, and the following year it's projected to be over 20.
I know.
21 or 22%.
Wow, that's
What did healthcare? You have healthcare increasing again?
At 9%, and that is what I was told would be the maximum at our last consortium meeting. We now have another one
Why
on
do we have a consortium?
Well, I have a question. Why are we in that if we're spending more than what I can get on the market? I can get in the open market.
It joined that consortium this year?
Who?
Who joined this?
Wilson.
Wilson.
So I have a question. How can it keep going? I mean, they're giving us more.
Let me tell you something. I mean, in our businesses, we're seeing increases of 20 to 60% in insurance.
I'm seeing flat. I swear, I just did my company. It's flat, and one other one, it's like 3. I don't know where they're shopping, but I'll tell you right now, seriously.
Just as we're looking at different topics, I'd just like to
I don't know
point
where you
out
guys are shopping.
Even
Our,
where I work went up 11.
our costs for students accessing cyber charter schools continues to rise as well. It's a major problem. And hopefully, I know that the Attorney General is looking at trying to reform cyber funding that may result in a windfall to school districts. Just don't know. We just don't know yet. So,
I got to ask the question because I asked it and we got some hearsay information or whether it's hearsay or it's urban legend or whatever, but I got to ask the question. If we all get said and done and we pass the budget and we can't find any other corrections and it's passed and the budget's presented to the board as is, and the board fails to pass this budget, okay? I know we hear different things like the state comes in and throws us all out. And
I have the answer from Mr. Subers
that's
if you
what I
would
want
like
to hear
it,
because...
which I forwarded to the board on November 14th, but I will read it out.
read it into the
I know you
record.
did. I just want
I know.
everybody else to hear this.
This is what our solicitor wrote. So, the following is in response to your inquiry regarding the implications of the failure of the Board of School Directors to pass a balanced budget for the 13-14 school year by June 30th, 2013. As you are aware, pursuant to both Special Section Act 1 of 2006 and Section 6-687 of the School Code, the district's final budget must be adopted no later than June 30th of 2013. Both Act 1 and Section 687 set forth additional requirements relating to publishing, advertising, and adoption of a preliminary budget and proposed final budget. The provisions relating to the adoption of the annual budget are mandatory. If the board were to fail to adopt the annual budget, it would be subject to possible removal for neglect of duty under Section 3-318 of the School Code. Pursuant to Section 3-318, if the Board of School Directors in any district refuses or neglects to perform any duty imposed upon it by the provisions of the School Code, any 10 resident taxpayers in the district may present a petition to the Court of Common Pleas setting forth the facts of such neglect of duty. If the court determines that a mandatory duty under the school code has not been performed by the board or has been neglected by them, the court shall have the power to remove the board or such board members as in the court's opinion is proper and appoint other qualified persons to replace them for their unexpired terms. Additionally, failure to adopt a budget could arguably cause the district to lose its authority to expend funds, there being no appropriation for said expenditures.
Okay, so if we fail to pass a budget that cuts all sports, removes kindergarten, there's got to be a group of 10 taxpayers who think that we were wrong by not raising their taxes and cutting all those expenditures, they put the petition together and petition Court of Common Pleas to remove one or all 9 of us, or any combination.
If we don't pass the budget.
If we don't pass the budget.
A budget,
A
not
budget.
the, okay.
Right.
Yeah, true.
Okay. Look,
I'm just that's the duty of this board. So by
Could take a
law,
while.
we're required to pass a budget. Period.
Correct.
That's what we got to do. We don't have to like it.
And Mr. Sheen, you can go back, make your comment every year. We don't know what the state's going to give us.
right. Yeah.
Well, I would also just, again, we're a month ahead of where we were last year at this time. This was a January conversation last year.
Look, we balanced. You guys have done a great job. You balanced the budget. Okay, that's something that's never been done at this point in time. So we have a balanced budget. Nobody in this room likes what they see.
It's not with a smile on our face.
It's balanced. So in terms of whether or not a majority of the board votes for it or not is a completely different matter. And the pieces may shrink or size within, shrink or grow within the discussion that's being had here. But quite frankly, Dr. Otto summed it up very well. We got 4 levers you can pull here. You can raise taxes.
There they are.
You can use fund balance. You can hopefully get increased revenues from the state or in addition to that. And at the end of the day, you got to reduce expenditures, or we got to go to our contractual partners and ask for concessions. Those are the levers we have available to us to solve the problem.
When can we expect to see the breakout of the furloughs and demotions and the activities?
The furloughs and demotions we have right now. The activities, if you could give me at least to the end of next week to do that.
And you'll also look into the transportation.
Absolutely.
Whether or not it's contractual or not, it's still something we have to look at potentially pulling and worry about.
And I'd like a legal opinion on that right away. I mean, I know you talked about.
Yeah, we'll get it.
I got it from
Oh, okay, that's fine.
I have a question real quick. When is the last possible date we have to decide whether we want to go to referendum or not?
I think by March
22nd.
22nd, March 22nd.
Okay, I'd just like to put out there, if we're thinking about using exceptions, I think we need to go to a referendum.
We don't have to put those in referendum.
I know we don't have to for exceptions. My own opinion is that it's wrong to use those exceptions without first going to a referendum. That's just my opinion, and I'm putting it out there for
But the problem with that, Mr. Kurtz, is if you put it out there and they're voted no, then we can't use them.
That's exactly right. If the taxpayer says you can't use them, then you can't use
No,
them.
but I think the referendum would be for the sports and the kindergarten. And
That's what I said, but that's not what Mr. Kurtz is saying.
Can I just clarify this? It says if the school district's proposed tax rate increase would exceed their index, even if all of its referendum exception requests were approved, and if it intends to submit a question for referendum for part of the tax rate increase, it has to be by that date. So I think we need a little clarification from Brian, because I'm not sure if you can go to referendum if you're not...
If we don't use the index.
If we don't use it.
I'm not certain. With the way that reads, that's how I read it, but I don't...
And I believe that's what he said in the previous year.
I think so, too.
I think you're right.
I think
Yeah,
you're
I
right.
think we have to use everything.
You have to use them in order to go to referendum. You have to use every available source. I have a question. Is those the only 2 exceptions were available?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Special ed and PSERS.
Again, I'm just asking. So in other words, we have to use them in order to put referendum out.
Correct.
Now, the answer to that is yes as of last year. Who knows what's going to come
Correct.
out
You're
this
right.
year? So
You're right. No,
I would just like to throw out for moving the process forward, we've suggested to you quite a few, again, suggested to you in the context of a balanced budget. Any of those staff reductions that we talked about require curtailment applications. Well, there's no deadline. What has changed this year, for the benefit of those of you who have been coming to these meetings, the school code was changed. You still cannot relieve a professional staff member in a public school of their position without applying to the state to curtail the program or for some other means, but that's the primary means. It used to be a 3-step process. Basically now, it's an application process. You apply, you vote it, we send it up. There's no return from the state. They say yes. It just, all they do, as I was told, I talked to my friend Steve Fisher at the state, at PDE, and he said, frankly, all we do is we put them out there, and our requirement is to post them, to let people know that you are accessing them. So as long as those curtailments do not override the state board regulations in Chapter 4 and the different chapters, you would be allowed to do it. So, but those applications need to be, they still need to be made by the administration. They still need to be voted by the board and then sent to Harrisburg. It's a one-way trip. They don't come back approved or not approved. They're automatically approved.
It would seem to me that you want to get the applications made and sent up to Harrisburg. It's our option whether we exercise.
Once they're approved, you don't have to access them.
There is we approve.
Correct.
Harrisburg's not doing any approval.
Correct. But your approval of it doesn't mean
sending the application in the first place.
Your approval doesn't mean you have to do it.
At the end of the day, they can come back and say, "Okay, you guys can do what you want."
And all the ones we've done in the past, we've only pulled the lever on.
Yeah, they have to approve it. They do have to
Right.
approve it. The state doesn't have to vote on it. The state used to approve it.
Right, but the state doesn't have to approve it anymore.
Correct. That's a school code change.
Right. But
And what are our contractual obligations for notification of those individuals if we decide to pull the lever?
I think isn't it 60 days?
They have
prior to.
there's a due process that they have, and they can actually challenge them.
So I don't know.
And you have to give them 10 days notice, and then they have a right to come before the board to challenge any demotion or furlough.
Okay. So we're looking at sometime beginning of May at the latest.
I would say April becomes the time when you want to give notice.
Another option I think we ought to look at is, again, the idea of closing down one of our buildings. Our enrollment as it stands today is where it was in like 05, 06, and so, or 06, 07. So we didn't even have a Monocacy school open at that time. And, I know we looked at this last year, but as enrollment continues to decline through the end of this year and maybe into next year, I think that's certainly something we ought to be looking at, particularly if kindergarten's on the table.
We have to look at that.
Cost savings is going to be if you were to do that.
We also have to be looking at it soon because that's a 18-month, 2-year
That's
process.
almost it's about an 18-month process.
No, it's not an 18-month process.
Maybe the mothball building.
You can,
totally, yes,
as of you have to make the decision by like April, somewhere around April, May, because you have to give notice. There's you start from when the school would normally open in August, and you got to roll it back like 90 days in terms of constructive notice to employees and things of that nature. And then there's a waiting period for the public to provide comment, which is like another 30 or 60 days. That takes you back into the beginning of May or the end of April or something like that. So it's something that the school district could exercise this year.
Yeah, but again,
for
we
next
better
year.
make sure we have all our costs in line, including the transportation of
But then why did?
the materials.
But I
know
thought-
we just put money into a chiller.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I thought we just
talked.
talked. I thought last year we talked to Dr. Otto, and the suggestion was not to do it, and then we spent
My
money on
litmus test was when we got
Birdsboro
around to about 3,500 across the
and- correct,
district.
which we're above that yet.
Well, remember, the money for Birdsboro was part of the Plan Con J. You could only use it towards a facilities improvement, and it's a sunk cost. It's not like you could have spent it on something
Right,
else.
we couldn't spend it on anything else, but
Well, we'll put it on the table.
again, if we got to look at the transportation end, because
Correct.
it's going to be an increased transportation. If we still maintain transportation,
Maybe you don't have transportation and you don't have the
Yeah.
building. I don't know.
yeah.
I think it might be helpful if we could come to some kind of consensus earlier rather than later on what we're collectively willing to do with the fund balance and how low we're willing to make that go. I mean, there's two. It's going to be the same as it was the past few years, and we've got these variables just flying around, and everything's changed. And if we can start picking away at some of these things and locking those down, and one of those discussions that we're always up for debate is just how much fund balance, as a board, are we willing to use? I mean, if we could just figure that out, try to get that conversation done, and then we know what we're left with from there.
Part of the conversation, Ms. Free Community, is we were concerned with, obviously got to use fund balance. The concern is it's gone next year.
That's
And
right,
then
it will be.
you're adding that debt immediately to as much fund balance as you use. And if we use all the fund balance this year, there is no.
But then we're back to the question we had earlier. It's a one-year fix.
That's what I meant, yeah. And there is no
So
safety
you really
net
want
for
to do?
next year.
And Mrs. Hamill even said that she doesn't want to do a one-year fix anymore. She wants to look at long-term. So spending most of the fund balance is doing a one-year fix, in my opinion.
I don't.
And it's not criticism. I mean, that's what you remember. She said, let's not do
Mr.
one.
Seminary,
Let's not do one-year fix.
Before you got here, we had that discussion, and 2.1 was the number that Ms. Penza felt comfortable not going below. That's your
And we're already
bottom
But then,
measure.
again, that's just. I agree with you. I'm just saying,
right,
but that's this year, and
what
then
you
next
need.
year.
That's what we need
You
to
have to
bridge the
keep.
gap
In other words, you have to
between.
keep like $2 million.
Now remember, one of the variables that occurs with fund balance is that we have a portion of fund balance in this year's budget. With our budget tightening that we have done consistently since I've been here, beyond spending for our contractual costs for salaries and benefits, we have a budget freeze in place, and it's been helping us. So we have to project, maybe we won't wind up using everything that we put in the budget for the fund balance this year, so that'll help that number a little bit. So that only time will tell that. It could fluctuate based on a tough winter. We need a lot of overtime for shoveling snow. So there are a lot of variables yet in that number that we just can't put our hands around on December 6th.
The 40 people that we're talking about, roughly, where are they coming from? What, generally speaking, who are they? Who are they? I understand the music program. We're cutting the music program out of the elementary school totally. That was 2 people. But what are the big?
You gave it to us.
I read all. I'll say them again.
Combined with high school. 1 5th grade team going.
Elementary band was 2.
No, wait a minute.
Elementary encores was
sheet.
14. Middle school team was 4.
Oh, the names?
Basic skills was 3.
Just what are they?
Give names.
No, I wouldn't do that.
No, but I think it's just important when he says, let's say, I don't know, three basic skills.
Here,
Doesn't
let me do it again.
necessarily mean
Let me do it again.
that it's those positions
Right, because
of all the bumping.
5.5 kindergarten teachers, 3 elementary basic skills teachers, 3 elementary classroom teachers as a result of just enrollment. The elementary band pullout, 1.35. It's really 2 people. Reduction of all elementary encores. That's 14 different people deliver that program. They would be reduced 35%. It's 4 full-time equivalents. That's budget language, but that's what it comes out to. Just for dollars and cents purposes, that's almost $450,000. Elimination of 4 middle school teachers based on the people that we know that would be or projected to be, about $300,000. Elimination of 2 part-time high school PE teachers. That's 2 people. Elimination of 1 high school business ed teacher. That's 1 FTE. We'd be consolidating some positions at the high school in the science area. 1 school psychologist would be 1 person. Mr. McElmoyle's resignation, or not retirement, which is tentative. He would have the right, obviously, to change his mind on that, but he has tentatively said he's looking to retire sometime next summer. And then the athletic facilitator, as I said, the athletic trainer, their secretary, and then everyone who works as a coach, those salaries wouldn't be paid out. So that, when you add all of that up, it comes out exactly to the number. It affects 40 people.
Can you send that to the board?
I have a question.
You were going to get it.
Okay, I have another question. Is there any more Act 93 people?
Well, you would lose 3 here.
Well, yeah, but is there any more?
It's not my recommendation at this time.
Okay, I'm just asking, do we need 3 principals in high school and 2 at the middle school?
I believe we do, but that's obviously subject to...
Again, I'm just asking.
Do we need all the administrators?
Do we need all 93 people?
Well, it's something we need to look at. I mean,
again,
maybe the administrative team should be looking at how you operate with 1 less.
Students versus, and again, I'm not advocating that, but I think you should look at doing that, or at least possibility.
I see you have here, and this is just a working session. It's just conversation, so I'm not trying to send you out with to-dos. But I see that you have here that you've lumped in the student activities, elimination of all these different things, $700,000 or close to it. Is there a way that you can itemize that?
We've already talked about
that. I asked to have till next Friday.
Okay.
We're going to do that for you.
In the off chance that people would want to self-fund it.
Mr. Wolf already asked that.
Okay.
The only, again, and we agree with that. The one is make sure, again, what I explained before, when they wanted to do half day kindergarten, remember taxpayer, it's a group. Two, if it's certain sports, do we run into Title IX? If football's the only one that can self-fund itself, do we run into a Title IX then? Because say we get rid of all sports, but they were able to raise money for football. or boys basketball. I'm just
Unless you brought it
girls
back.
softball, and then there's no boys sports. Do we run into it? That was my question.
We should probably
But it's
be
something we should
talking
look at.
to our partners
Sure.
like Amity AC and seeing if there's a way to,
Yeah, if we bring it back as a club, then you're not running a Title IX issue, but then there's competition issues, so.
Correct.
Can we
Then they
keep some
can,
of these-
yeah. Then
can we keep some of these programs by working with other school districts and maybe sharing something that we can?
I think the PIAA has
Can
a
we do
certain regulation, so each group would have
Correct.
to go and look at what their regulation is for their team.
correct.
Like if the PIAA says you can go as a club, you need a sponsor, you need this, you need that, then you abide by all the PIAA, and then you can still participate.
Yes,
But
There
you
is a
don't have
provision.
Something like
There
the
is a
music
provision in
program, like
PIAA. Let me.
share the cost throughout multiple school districts.
I'll research this a little bit more, but I do believe that if you were not to have a sport, students would be able to make their choice to go to another school district to
Yeah,
participate.
That's how Antietam works. Some of the Antietam kids play for Exeter.
If you don't have a sport, I believe students get the right to go to a neighboring school district.
Correct.
How about
And
music?
then it's their choice. Music, I've never heard of that happening. Sports, I know it happens for small school districts that are around bigger school districts.
But Mr. Seminary, your first question, yeah, we did ask him to break it down.
Thank you.
When you put in the savings for the individual activities, did you take everything, transportation, coaches?
For the athletic side, yes, it was the whole budget, including salaries,
Total-
benefits, and whatever
total amount.
supplies, transportation.
Total nut.
Yes.
I have a question, and this is not meant to be controversial, but it usually is for me. Any idea revenue from the racetrack, Union Township? Any idea? Again,
No,
anybody know where that stands? Okay, again,
I wouldn't count on it for
I
13,
had
14.
contacted.
Again, there was an open house years ago. And
They don't even have preliminary plan
Okay,
approval.
that's all. I'm just asking the question. Because
Yeah,
again,
we're a few years away from seeing anything there.
okay, again, but again, I know there was an open house that someone was attended years ago. And,
They want to come
Right.
once they have plans and talk to the finance committee.
The industrial
I have not-
park.
okay, that's fine. Again, there was an open house years ago, and I thought by now, I haven't kept up on that. That's why I asked the question.
I haven't heard a peep.
They haven't gotten a preliminary plan approval yet.
Okay.
And then from there, you have to get final plan approval, and then from there, you got to
Okay.
construct.
No, the reason why I asked is I know there were some revenue every year.
Maybe,
Once.
maybe
You're
14.
talking at least
5
3
years.
years.
Okay, again, that's
4
fine.
to
I just
5.
wanted
If
to
they're
ask
fast-tracking it.
if that was a
3 to 5, do you see any revenue?
No, the first year when doing construction, we'd see some.
Okay.
That was my point. That's why I asked again. Who knew where we were?
Safe to say we don't have a line item in for that revenue yet.
I just asked the question. Like I said, I'm not.
You know, again, I mean, for the sake of everybody sitting out in the audience, you're going to look at others. One of the biggest issues we have as a school district is we have no major industry. That's our problem.
The school district is the major industry.
Right, we are the major industry.
We're the
of this-
largest employer in this community.
Correct. I mean, you look at Exeter and you look at some of these others. They've got industry. They've got shopping centers. They've got a lot of.
But you know what? We're gonna do the same thing we've done for 10 years. We need to work with the township. We need to work with the boroughs to bring the, and it still just doesn't happen. I mean, you know, and it's, you know,
Well, that's because businesses don't like taxes.
correct.
So,
Yeah, but
you got to
it's a
catch
double-edged
22,
sword.
right?
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, but it's
You
a
gotta bring
double-edged
business
sword,
in,
yeah.
lower your taxes.
I'm
You
just
can't get
saying.
business.
Yeah, and again, we're high, but we're
taxes.
not. Again, some other schools are creeping up to us. We're not the highest one. Are we?
Look, I mean, we've met with the guys from Amity. We've met with Uniontown. We met with
Yeah, but still,
Birdsboro,
you know.
and they've, they're out there aggressively trying to promote.
We've done the Keystone, whatever that thing's
I'm saying
called.
they can't get developers to buy in.
Yeah.
Opportunity zones.
Thank you. I mean,
I mean, they're preferring to try to put in developments versus.
correct,
And,
and that's
even they're getting voted down.
that's the
So I mean,
somewhat
it's-
annoying thing, I guess.
So where do we go from here?
We need a
Realistically,
Castells.
who wants to expand an economy like this?
Yeah.
True.
Everybody's just sitting on the money, on the sideline right now.
Okay, so you guys have a working list of items to start assembling to get to the board, so we can start looking at different components of these budget numbers. You're looking into some ideas in terms of sharing costs, maybe with other school districts or other entities of some kind. I think we should reach out to places like Amity Athletics or any other groups out there like that that can, help us front some of the burdens of the district. I think we also ought to look at the cost, as you said, per sport. I mean, we have other levers we can pull. We can increase fees and dues and things of that nature, or implement new ones in terms of trying to increase revenues, so that some of those line items that are fun for kids become self-sustaining outside of the funding that we have for education. That's my thought on that. Does any other board member have any comments or questions or ideas before I let the public?
Yeah, I'll say one thing. I'd like to thank the administration for putting this together much faster than has been done in the past, and I'd just like to reemphasize all this is hypothetical at this point, and there are a lot of other options we have. One of them is some of our collective bargaining partners coming to the table, and maybe we could reduce that head count, and of course we could preserve some of the educational programming. So we do have, hopefully that will happen, in my opinion.
That's one of the biggies. 70% of our budget. Any other questions?
We have nothing further.
Okay. People from the public, we don't have a podium.
It's over there.
So if you have a comment you'd like to make,
microphone off of it.
the same rules will apply here. You have 3 minutes. You can address the board, state your name and where you live, and we'll do our best to answer your questions for you, or just take your comments.
This is the sign-in sheet there.
Well, we'll get.
No.
She's going to write it
Joe
down.
Corey, 103 Orchard View Drive in Douglasville. I was wondering, I've got a couple of things. You mentioned that salaries are projected to increase by 6%. So I was wondering, or at least I would encourage you to go back and really take a look at that area. It's not something that's been talked about so far tonight.
Sure. Hold on.
Take a good look at that.
Okay. What are your other comments?
I'd like to get a copy of the June 2012 audited financials, if I could. How would I go about doing that?
I believe they're out on the internet.
I couldn't find them. Are they on the website?
Under the
Sure.
business office, under financial statements, I believe.
Okay.
If you can't find them, just give us a call. We'll make sure you get a copy.
I believe there's the last couple years out. If you want to go on, I'll quick look here.
Okay. And then just a comment on the student activities and the programs and things. That cost is less than 1% of your budget. There's 99 other percent to take a look at. Thank you.
Sir,
Joe?
it is out under admin department's business office financial statements from June 2007 to June 2012 are out there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sir, for your benefit, just so you understand, there are certain constraints the school district operates under. If you looked at the pie chart, can you flip back to the pie chart? One of the 2 pie charts. Doesn't matter which one.
Yeah.
There you go. That's fine. So if you can look at that pie chart, what you're going to see under there is, for example, other financing. So there are debt financing. We have about $100 million of debt, 93, 94 million at this point. We spend $7 million a year on debt. We can't control that. That's a fixed cost. And we'll have that for the next 20-something years. So we're locked in. Under other contracted services, things like our facilities, what we spend on energy costs, electric, oil, heat, that sort of thing, about $1 million a year, locked into that. Unless we're shutting down buildings, there's a certain cost that we have to spend to upkeep the buildings. I believe that's around $4 million a year we spend on facilities, $3 million, somewhere in that range. And that's one area of our budget where it's been going down every year. We've done a good job in controlling our costs there. Special education and things of that nature, again, are out of our hands. Transportation is in there as well. That's a contractual obligation. It's based on the number of students we have riding the buses, and we've done a good job over the last 3 or 4 years reducing the number of buses and things like that we've used. Our contractual partners in that regard have been worked very cooperatively with us to find ways to reduce that overall expense. When it gets to our supplies, as you heard me mention earlier, that's been something that has been constant, or we've kept it under control. It's not like that's been a ballooning cost. We look at it every single year. We have a freeze on every single budget for the last 3 years, so that there's no extraordinary expenses in those regards. As you said, with salaries and benefits, those are contractual obligations. We have a contract that we're locked into
Well, how much
until
of the salaries are teacher salaries versus? you know, you got 24 million in salaries roughly for this current year.
I would say 90%.
What percentage of that is
About
teachers?
90%.
I would say. I mean, I would have to.
90% of.
We're talking with them, okay? We're talking with all three unions, okay? All three contracts right now. So let's see where that goes before, we know that's the biggest piece. They know it's the biggest piece.
So there's a 6% increase in the teacher contract?
No.
There are steps. There are steps within the contract, and then those steps move every year as well. So as teachers are working in the school district, they move up the steps annually, right? Mm-hmm. And those steps are moving too. So yes, overall, if you look at the growth of that line item in our budget from one year to the next to the next, it's growing at a 6 to 7% clip.
I'm sorry,
That-
it's
that
about
is,
77%.
It's not
77.
it's not discretionary, Joe. It's contractual.
Yeah. No, I understand.
We don't have the discretion of looking at that and making that go down. We can't do that. We're contracted
So
to
the
do that.
steps, though, go up more than 6%. That's
That would be correct.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
That would be correct.
Some do, some
More
don't.
than 6%.
It's an average. Mrs. Penza said it's an average of 6.
That's the way contracts are
It's an
constructed.
average of 6.
Some are higher, some are lower.
Sure.
And in terms of the employee benefits, that's obviously driven by our healthcare costs. You have Social Security and Medicare, those types of things, which are a percentage of salaries, right? And then you have PSERS, which is a retirement fund, which is completely out of our control as well, and that's obviously ballooning as well. And that's also based on the compensation salaries.
Several years back, I took part of the budget workshop. It was before you were on the board. Mr. Shaheen and Mr. McCullough were both on board at that time. I am familiar with a lot of what you're referring to. I appreciate you saying those things. It would then suggest, though, there's about $5 million in non-teacher salaries, right? You said 77%. It's about $17 million out of the 24. 18 million. So what percentage raise did you put in for the administrative side of the house?
Their contract is locked in at COLA, cost of living.
So 2.
Plus.
Probably
1.
I did 5 because it's the COLA plus they can get up to.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right, so I would,
that gets
that's what I'm
adjusted
encouraging you guys to take a
in
look
May.
at the positions you have, take a, and again, now I'm lumping the teachers into the whole mix too, and then I'm going to shut up. But you have, you're talking about $400,000 for student activities, and of course I'm biased, my daughter's in the school district. But you got $400,000 in student activities, get a 5% raise instead of 6% overall, and you funded that piece of it. So that, all right, I'm shutting up. Thank you very much.
Don't shut up. Say your piece. You're right.
Okay.
I adjust it once we know.
This is Dave.
Yeah, it's maybe 90,000.
I'm Chap, 729 the second. I think I'm just going to ask my questions first.
Write them down.
It's my understanding, and I could be wrong, if there's a referendum to go over the maximum tax increase the state says, it's just a referendum to go over that to a certain number.
Right.
The referendum does not state, it's my understanding, does not state on the ballot where that money goes.
Yes.
No,
The
it does.
referendum question, you actually have to state
you have to
exactly
state
what it's
what it's
for.
for.
You must.
First you have to state how much it's going up.
You have to do both.
Is that right?
Yes. You have to do both.
And you're 100% sure of this?
I'll double check it. I'll double check
The other
that.
question I have is, in the beginning, you mentioned something right in the overview about 2.3%.
That's the index.
Okay, that's the index.
The Act 1 index, 2.3%.
Does that include or not include exemptions?
Does not.
Does not.
Okay. And what millage is a 2.3?
0.67-ish.
About the same as it was last year.
That
Hasn't
was your
changed.
first number you gave.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
And if you added 2 exemptions, you can get up to 1.27. Now I understand that. In January, don't you have to take a vote whether or not you want to use the exemptions? Isn't that the first vote you have to take?
The first vote is the preliminary budget.
Right.
It's actually in February.
February.
So what I'm going to be asking the board is by mid-January, I need to kind of know what they're looking at for the preliminary, so that at the voting meeting in January they can see it, because it actually has to go out to the public prior to them voting on it in February. So the first vote is the preliminary budget, which is February 11th.
And that will could include, if you're going to the index and above the exemptions, that vote would be in February. That doesn't mean you have to do it. Is that correct?
The vote in February could actually have a tax increase above the index, above the exemptions.
Oh.
It could be, in this extreme example, it could be for 100% tax increase, but that's not, again, what they will be voting on in June. That's just the preliminary.
But in the past, you voted like in January or February not to. That was a different vote then, right?
No, for the past 3 years that I've been here.
For the last few years, we have voted, for the last few years, we voted to use not only the index, but the exceptions as well.
And then roll them back after we're going through the process.
We got approval, they just did not
use them. In January.
Yeah.
To approve the preliminary.
Okay. When you talk about the Encore going down 14 people, okay, and something like a decrease of 35%, the areas you're talking about are like what? Art?
Phys ed, art, music, computer science.
Computer science.
And music.
And music, art, and computer science.
Phys ed.
Library.
And library.
Library and phys ed.
And phys ed. And this is elementary we're talking about when you
Correct.
talked about Encore.
Correct.
So you would lower the amount of time that the students are spending in art, music, computer science, library, and phys ed, and what would they be doing instead?
They would just have reduced time, and then when they're done, they would be back in class.
So the students would be getting more instruction in what?
Reading, math, science, social studies.
The phys ed department in the high school, do they need the stadium to run their program?
Need? I would have to say probably not need.
Okay. So
They do use it.
But I mean, is it mandatory for them to have their
To have a stadium, to run a PE program, no.
Okay. If you don't have sports, what's the need of the stadium?
It's a good question.
There is none.
Pardon?
There is none then.
Right, so then my suggestion is, if that's the route you're going, I'm not saying that's the route to go, then put it up for sale.
That would certainly be an option.
For sale. A few years ago, didn't the band get a new set of uniforms?
Oh my God, that goes back.
I can't answer that.
Oh,
That
they
didn't,
didn't get that
5?
recently?
2005.
that didn't happen in my
6 years
tenure
ago?
here.
Didn't happen?
No, it's 5 or 6 years ago.
Not
No,
since 2008.
no.
Tom, I know it wasn't happening since I've been here.
No, it was 5.
kid was in high school.
Okay.
He's
It's
graduating
5 or
this year.
6 years ago. The board bought the first 140, and any replacements the boosters do.
And then they donated the other ones to Louisiana.
Yeah, then we
Some school.
donated the old
Yeah,
ones,
that's
but the
beyond
board
my
did purchase them.
recognition.
God, it goes back 5, 6, 7 years.
Is there income from the state?
And the last,
Okay, hold on.
I guess the last thing I have to say is, I've been following the process you've done the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years of doing this. And I understand the board saying they'd rather go through this process. Evidently, there was a consensus on the board to do it this way. I'm not 100% sure this is the right way to do it, because I don't like what I've seen today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I, before the next person, I'm sorry, can I ask Dr. Ali one more thing? We're not only breaking down what, the salary of who it is, like it's 5 kindergarten teachers, everything else. Can you also tell me how much classroom sizes will increase?
Sure.
In the elementary schools. I want to know what classroom sizes. I'm sorry. Anybody from the public, go ahead.
Yeah, because we're limited on classes. I know that.
Again, I'm just and also getting back. Well, obviously,
Yeah,
if
but
we
we're not
can-
at capacity now. So.
If we ask again, Mr. Basil's thing, if we close the school, make sure we can fit all the kids in the other two.
Well, we have in the
Okay,
past.
well, I'm just asking the question.
We've done a preliminary look, and it's not a drastic increase.
Okay,
I'll give you exact numbers.
that's fine. I just want to know what they'll go up to. Concerning the seeds.
Any other questions or comments from members of the public?
Amy Hicks, Orchardview Drive, Douglasville.
Can you give us your address?
Well,
She did.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear it.
I just want to say for the benefit of the public and press that's here, I feel in some ways maybe some of the presentation today might be slanted a little. You keep referring to the salaries as being the biggest piece of the pie, and in the service industry, obviously that's going to be the case. Earlier you also mentioned about how you found creative ways to get concessions from classified staff and concessions in other ways, but did not mention the fact that in years past teachers have conceded and given you, I believe it was $1.3 million 2 years ago in a pay freeze, and we're currently saving you about $800,000 right now with the steps that we've taken by freezing that salary. I don't know if those numbers are exactly correct, and maybe you can correct me on the exact numbers, but we have saved them quite a bit of money in earlier concessions. I just want to make sure that was acknowledged for everybody's benefit.
Any other comments?
My name is Jenny Noacker. I live at 365 Rosecliff Drive in Douglasville. This is actually my first meeting I've been to. My kids are 2 and 4, and both my husband and I grew up in Danny Boone, and I even have Mrs. Romaine as a math teacher. I'm proud to say that, and I always loved math. We actually lived in Exeter and moved back to the school district to put our kids in Danny Boone because we loved our experience. School, activities, sports. My husband and I were both involved in sports all the time, activities, school. It made me a well-rounded person. I went to Lehigh. I have a degree in chemical engineering, and it made me who I am today, which I believe is a good thing, even though sometimes my husband tells me not. A couple questions. The first thing is, if we live in a world where you need to project, right? You need to plan for the future. We all have retirement funds, for some of us 401ks, pensions, whatever. So if we knew that this was an era of financial difficulty, which is several years, and we planned for several years ahead, then why would we not raise taxes for the people just to make the people happy? If we knew that there was going to be financial hardships down the road.
Do you want me to answer that question? Okay. I got on this board 5 years ago and suggested we do multi-year planning, and it was never done. So I don't know what to tell you. We'd approach, the methodology had always been to approach our budget 1 year at a time. Even though we were signing a 5-year contract with our teachers or a 3-year contract or 4-year contract with our transportation providers, we're signing all these obligations, debt obligations and things like that, projected out 20 years. But we never bothered to put together a budget that looked past 12 months.
Right.
So, you have a problem, right? And the other issue, the other tension you always have is, from 1 year to the next, and is you don't know how much money the state is going to provide in terms of their reimbursements or the additional aid that they give us. When I first got on this board, it seemed to be that every year the state provided, 2 or 3% more than they did, or 5% more than they did the year before. That only lasted for 1 year when I was here. And then after that, it's all gone downhill. I mean, we got some stimulus money 1 year. That was a shot in the arm. We got another year, we got money back from the state in terms of construction projects. We were able to use some of that. We used a bond defeasance, and we're able to get through with that. But the state has basically given us the same money that we've had for the last, going back 4 years. Whatever we got funded 4 years ago, that's what we got funded. That's what we've been funded for ever since. And when you sign a contract over here that's doing this, and you're projecting your state support to do this, and your state support does that, well, now you have a deficit going forward. We can't change the contract without opening up a contract and having those discussions with our partners. So what's the alternative? You got to raise taxes. Well, as we were raising taxes from 1 year to the next, and this school district raised taxes by the maximum amount 10 years in a row. I mean, if you're a resident here, 10 years ago you're paying 0.175 mils. Now we're paying almost 30 mils in real estate taxes. It's an increase of 80-90%. So,
but in reality, it's how we get by.
Well, I'm just letting you know, for some people, particularly in the last few years with this economy, they lost their jobs, they've lost their homes, and taxes are a part of that. So, and we're throwing surpluses. So every year we raise taxes, we threw a surplus by the same amount. It's a little hard to justify raising taxes on folks when, at the end of the day, you're throwing a surplus by the exact same number that you're raising taxes by. So, look, I'm one member of a board of 9,
Right.
and this board has changed. We have different people sitting here than we did 2 years ago, than we did 3 years ago, 4 years ago. We try to rule by consensus. So you have some people that feel very passionately about one issue versus another, and we try to come to some sort of agreement in the middle, and that's the path forward. I think if you look at our budget over the last couple of years, there was compromise amongst board members on how we would get to a balanced budget from one year to the next. People who didn't want to raise taxes, raised taxes. People who didn't want to use fund balance, use fund balance. People who didn't want to make cuts, agreed to make cuts. Partners of ours in terms of our contracts came to the fore and helped us with our contractual obligations. So when everybody comes together and when all 4 levers that we referred to earlier are pulled, the blow to everyone or one particular group over another is softened, right? Everybody is a stakeholder. Everybody has skin in the game. When one of those levers isn't pulled at all, you're going to see an increase on the other legs of the table to make those things work.
If you were to look at where our property taxes were going a number of years ago, as Mr. Bezos said, the state, more or less, money we were projecting when we looked at a lot of this. You said, why do we look forward? We look forward 4 years ago, probably before Mrs. Penza came on board here. It was projected that we were going to get 2 to 3% every year from the state. That was the Democratic government, the governor, and he was increasing 2 and 3% ongoing. We were getting 2 and 3% increase in our real estate, our transfer taxes. We were getting that revenue, that income. Nobody foresaw
2008.
Well, and the other thing is,
and the cliff came and it
and here's the other thing I like to add. We can't control teachers' retirement. 10 years ago, we were probably funding 5%. Now we're funding 16 next year, and they project to do 20. So, there are certain things that even if you did a 5-year projection 5 years ago, who would have predicted that next year we're going to spend 20%?
But again, that was all because
I agree, but what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of things that we had no control over or that we saw
I
coming.
understand that, but you're always supposed to plan for worst case scenario.
Well,
And that's what,
again.
I understand, like you say, okay, the state gave us this extra money all the time, but when do we find out when the state is going to give us a certain amount of dollars before the budget's approved, correct?
We don't get
Correct.
that number.
Well,
Exactly.
Usually sometime in the spring.
well,
No.
we find out what he projects in February,
It's a
but until
projection.
it's
Doesn't mean
approved
we're
in
gonna get it.
June, we don't
Usually
know.
the state number isn't, we haven't been able to lock in the state number the last couple of years
excuse me.
until about June.
The state's supposed to pass it by June.
Right, they
There have been
haven't.
times October of the following year that we know what we're getting.
Correct.
And not only that, but
So-
at the end of the day, even as if what you're suggesting, had we raised taxes by the maximum amount every single year, it still would not have kept pace with our contractual obligations.
Right, but it would help.
I know, I've only been on
We'd
the
still
board
be where
for
we
a
are
year.
today.
Not as
But,
bad.
Well,
But when I walked around talking,
Trust me.
when I went to do my petition to get on the board, and I talked to, I don't know how many people just walking around, there was an outcry of senior citizens just begging, please don't raise our taxes anymore because we can't afford my husband's medicine, we can't afford our house, we're going to have to, I personally know 2 elderly people that lost their homes because they just can't afford it anymore. So you and I may be able to afford it because we still have active incomes. Other people in our community don't have active incomes anymore and they can't keep up. So we have to say, okay, I don't want to lose sports, but can I justify raising everything on the elderly so my kids can play sports? I don't know. That's a
But I'm not even
difficult-
thinking about sports and activities.
I'm just talking about, I just use it as
I'm
an
looking at
example.
also teachers. Every year we're cutting more and more teachers, aides. Why are we losing enrollment? Because who wants to live here anymore?
Exactly.
I mean, honestly, who wants to move into our school district and bring their kids
Which is
here?
going to have a negative effect on the value of your home.
Exactly.
Exactly, sure.
So who wants to live here? Who wants to bring their kids to Danbury?
Absolutely.
For example, my child is a special needs child. We took her to a psychologist. She said to us, what school district are you in? I said, Danny Boone. She said, oh. That's like, oh my gosh. That's terrible. That's sickening. That's embarrassing. We should be embarrassed as a school district to know that there's even doctors that are helping kids with special needs that are saying, oh, you live in Boone, you should probably move to like Wilson or somewhere else, even Exeter. What?
Mm-hmm.
And yet we still keep cutting, like I'm not even thinking sports and activities, there's teachers. Okay, so in return, we're not raising taxes. Granted, I understand people that are elderly. I have obviously grandparents, great-grandparents, things like that they have a fixed income. But then there's teachers that are losing jobs too.
Well, understand though, we have a contract, and that contract is increasing at a rate like this, exponentially, every year. Okay, so the question and the tension, and I'm not going to start calling things. I don't want this to turn into a contractual thing, but the tension this board always wrestles with is you want to pay your professional employees well, correct? Because you want to retain good employees. Okay, that's one thing. The tension to that is, where's the money come from to pay for it? And can you afford to continue to pay for that? I don't know what the answer is. I've watched our salaries and benefits do this on an individual level every single year. Okay, and you just have to sit down and say, okay, well, what's the sustainable level? Do we want our millage to be at 36, 38? What point do you want your taxes to sustain the obligations that people want here? And that's a discussion that the taxpayers have to have, and we as a board who represent those people have to come to some sort of agreement on. You know, at some point you're going to look at your contract and you're going to say, okay, well, look, 5 years out, this is where we're going to be. How do you pay for that? Well, you're going to bring it all from local taxes, or you're going to cut some of your expenses. My personal thing is, I don't think we have a revenue problem. I think we have an expense problem. I think our expenses are accelerating faster than they should be, and beyond what a standard of living COLA has been for the last 3 or 4 years. And those assumptions that were made were based on a different economy 4 or 5 years ago. It's not the same. But our contracts haven't changed to reflect that. And that's the biggest part of our budget. So for the last 3 years, we've done a lot of things to change the little bit of our budget that's left available for us that we have discretion in to change and try to do things. Activity fees, you know, you name it. Making cuts here and there, going to half-day kindergartens. But at the end of the day, the biggest part of our budget is salaries and benefits. And if you're going to try to balance a budget going forward, you have to address salaries and benefits.
And every time in the last 3 years, one or more of our contractual partners have stepped forward.
Absolutely.
Okay?
We're not denigrating any of it.
Classified staff did last year, taking nothing. The Act 93 have. They've all stepped forward at one time or another and have given us some assistance. We're just, unfortunately, having to go back to that well again this year because of where it is.
I think bad financial planning is the result of this. You heard the term "pay me now or pay me later." This is later. It's because we've had this mentality in the past of raising taxes, and then go spend the money instead of sitting down and doing a multi-year budget and say, what can we really afford to spend, so that we keep going. The answer isn't raising people's taxes, because you end up right here where we are right now.
Right.
You raise taxes, but you overspend because you don't know what you can spend, what you can't, and that's why we're stuck here. Now what we're trying to do is say we've got to be more fiscal responsible here. We've got to understand what can we afford to spend, and how much more above that are we spending today, and it's a lot compared to what we can afford to spend.
Which is what we all live by. You can't spend above your means.
You can't spend above your means, and you know, to be critical, we've done that in the past, and that's why we're here today.
Exactly.
No one's stepped back and said, let's look at this 4 years out, 5 years out. Are we okay doing this? Play out the numbers. Let's say something does go wrong, you know, reduce your revenues by a certain percentage and see if that plays out. None of that was done. Now we're sitting here saying, you know, let's beat up the senior citizens and raise their taxes again. That's not going to fix the problem. Look, that's what's been done in the past.
One thing I would like to add, though, it's not just us. Every school district in Berks County has the same thing, maybe not to the magnitude we have. So, again, I agree with there probably should have been better financial planning years ago. But, again, every school district in Berks County, if you read the paper, Muhlenberg's 2.7 today, Mifflin's 3.1. Again, I'm not saying we're not to blame for this, but you know what I mean? It's not just unique to Daniel Boone. They're all.
So is a large, how much of our debt is contributed to, like, the football field, all-purpose field, I'm sorry?
We spent $3 million on the stadium. We spent $9 million renovating Amity Primary Center. We spent, $27 million building the Monocacy School.
No,
and
18.
Huh?
18
million?
21.
I thought it was over 20.
The middle school
Again,
was
let's
27.
go back to the projection.
Well, whatever.
I mean, we need those buildings.
Correct. Right,
Whatever.
On the population of the district growing.
Look, at the end of the day, there's sunk costs. You can't do anything about it. They're there.
Yeah.
Okay? So what do? You just have to deal with the reality of the situation. We have that debt. We can't change the debt. We can't change our interest payments going forward. There are bond issues. There's nothing left for us to do. So now we have to sit there and say that's something we have to work around. It's a constraint. So what are the other variables in our contract that have flexibility?
And
those are the ones we're going to focus on.
At the time those schools were built, like Mr. Sheen said, there was projected growth. Because you can't just go build a school. You have to have PDE approval. So it's not like the prior boards just arbitrarily said, oh, let's build a school. They had a reason and petitioned this PDE to do it, which obviously I think you do, 5 or 6 year projection, you'd even try to get the plans provided. So at that time, enrollment was going up.
Just so if I could add part to that.
We could have built the school for less money.
Just a historical
There's a lot of outcry.
We didn't have to spend as much as we did. So now we've got a $100 million debt. Everyone forgets about that because we pay our debt service every year. That's in our operating budget. But balancing this budget, we're always talking about other expenses. But remember, we're still sitting on a $100 million debt that we have to pay off. I mean, how much more money can we spend? Start paying down our debt. We've spent. We've had a good time spending our money.
Well, now it's previous boards did. I mean, we're at a point where...
Well, we represent the board.
Yeah, I understand we represent
now
the board.
Now it's time to be more responsible and try to make this work. And we have to do that as a community. We have to figure this out together. We inherited this issue like
we're all part of the same community. I mean, at the end of the day, the 9 of us sitting here live here. I've lived here for 40-something years, okay? So... we're all part of this community. We all support our schools. We all support our teachers. We all support our fellow taxpayers. Somehow we got to manage a way to get together and figure our way through this. Not this year, but next year and the year after and the year after. I don't see the economy improving anytime over the next 2 or 3 years. But we got to get there. We're going to run out of fund balance. If not this year, next year.
Soon.
I mean, none of this are the great options for us. Because I had 3 daughters. I had 2 that graduated already. One that's a sophomore. And we're looking at everything that she's involved in gone. So, I mean, that's a tough thing for me to swallow. But at the end of the day, we have to be a zero. At the end, we have to be totally balanced. We don't have the luxury of writing ourselves a bigger credit card like the government, federal, state, whatever. We have to be zero. We have to come up with that amount. And there's the pain right there. There's no simple solution or magic bullet for it.
And we don't operate in a vacuum either.
Quite honestly, you standing there, it's a breath of fresh air. Mr. Schatt standing there. Typically, there is a line of people in here telling us, "Don't raise our taxes. Don't raise our taxes. Don't raise our taxes. We don't care what you got to do. Don't raise our taxes." We rarely hear raise our taxes to keep our program. We don't hear that.
Well, I disagree. But when I first got on this board, we heard a lot of that.
But now we might have to ask that.
We heard a lot of that. Go ahead, reach into my pocket, raise my taxes. I want X, Y, and Z.
Sure.
We heard a lot of that.
Not in the last couple of years.
Well, the economy's changed.
I understand that. Yeah.
But we also have to keep to consider, just for the benefit of the public. Look, people live in Birdsboro. What are you paying for water and sewer?
$1,000 a year.
Well, yeah.
Okay. We're sensitive to that.
Exactly.
Union Township, they're looking at raising their millage 2.2 mils this year, on top of what we're considering. So now you got people living in Union looking at maybe a 3 or 4 or 5 mil increase. Yeah, no, I'm just saying, and I don't know what Amity's doing. So,
no tax increase.
You got different people living in different parts of the community,
correct?
And they're saying, well, wait a minute, my neighbors are going to get walloped. Okay, so I got to be sensitive to what's happening to them too. But at the same time, I want my kids to go to a good school. It's a no-win situation.
So 2 quick questions. The first one was where I was going with the all-purpose field. Am I understanding correctly? This is just a question. That someone was actually willing to fund that project to actually pay for that field. So that's
no.
That's
an urban legend.
It's an urban legend.
That's an urban legend.
Okay.
Well, we had a group come forward who said every dollar you raise, we'll match it, and that group disappeared as soon as we brought forward $3 million.
You're
Yeah, but that's not what
you're
she's
paying
talking
for
about.
that field.
You're not talking about that. You're talking about
The Haynes and
You're
Killer.
But I'm just saying, if you want to know who's paying for
You're
it, it's
talking about a
you.
local business person saying, "No, you give X amount, I'll put the field there."
Right.
That
I'm glad
never-
to see
that's
that
not
field.
true.
I ran on that track.
That's not true.
Once all the time, and I'm glad to see that these kids.
No,
It's a wonderful facility.
Because the prior superintendent was asked that question because I would have fired him if he didn't take the money without at least discussing it with the board. It's an urban legend.
Yeah.
Okay. The second question is salaries wise. What's that breakdown of admin versus like teachers and all that stuff? Is there a breakdown of that?
Mr. Schiff just asked that.
68%.
Teachers are professional staff is 77%.
Oh, you did say that? No. Okay.
Administrators are.
Teachers are 77%.
Yeah.
Teachers, administration's probably
7%.
the rest is custodial.
And the rest are your extracurricular coaches and your classified staff.
And of that, of the administration, 7%, how many people does that include versus number of teachers?
20 or...
No, I don't have the exact. I'd have to
probably
get you that
16 or
information.
17 versus 401.
No, 278 teachers
Okay.
maybe?
278 teachers.
Maybe. Maybe. Hold on.
Is that what you just said?
Teaching staff is in the 250s.
Is it 250? I thought it was 270. Hold on. Sorry, it's going to take me a minute.
We have...
If you look at what did the
278.
average head count make in
278.
There you go.
278, and there are...
288, don't we?
No, it's 278. That's the current count, 278.
And what about administrators?
And 20 administrators.
That's close.
Correct. So 77% for 278 people and 7% for 20.
Correct.
No, I think you said that.
7% for 20.
Okay.
Okay.
That's correct.
I'd like to be an administrator.
But that's everywhere.
Mr. Schack, before you come up, are there any other public comment?
Matt Huddleston, 208 Berkshire Drive, in Douglasville. I have a couple of comments and a couple of questions and make it quick. First off, I know it's not fun what you do, what you have to do. It's just not. We're all in the same situation. As far as increases go, I work for Comcast, which is one of the 20 biggest companies in the world, revenue-wise. I've gotten 1.5% raise over 5 years, period. My take-home pay is $785 a month less than what it was when I started because of cuts, because of our insurance has gone up from $90 a month to $625 a month. And we're an extremely profitable company. It's just, that's the market right now. Everyone has to take a hit. That's just life. When it comes to extracurricular activities, I know it's a hot topic. I know it's only 400 and some odd thousand that can take in the revenues brought back in versus kindergarten versus not having kindergarten. If you eliminate extracurriculars, you pretty much set all your high school students up for not getting into good colleges, period. They will not be looked at because every college is such even more difficult to get into. The kids that could go to a good, solid Big 10 or Big 12 or ACC school are going to be going to, night schools, cyber schools, just because they're not going to be accepted. That's just the here and there. Second thing when it comes to that, and I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. That's just what's going to happen. You're also going to have a large chunk of your better students are going to look elsewhere. They're going to go to other schools. And as a taxpayer, I'm willing to pony up more money because my other option is send my kids to private schools. And I would rather pay more taxes than to pay the exorbitant amount to go to private school. I think the other thing that really concerns me and is probably the biggest issue is nobody's going to, like something someone said, no one's going to want to come to the school if there's no extracurricular activities. It's hard enough when I came here, there wasn't
a lot of foreign languages offered. That was a big. There wasn't, strings instead of just band. But if there's no extracurricular activities, I can't sell the house. Period. I can't get out. I will do one of options that everyone else is doing, short sell it, which I won't be able to do, or just say, heck with it, I'm walking away, and just take the bankruptcy option. Because if I want my kids to go to a school that allows them to do things. Those are very key issues. I think I'm sure it's all been thought through. I know it's not been easy to look at the cuts. It's the last thing you guys want to do. None of us want to go through it. When it comes to the, I guess, the revenue versus how much we bring in, how much you don't, 1% or $1 million increase, what does that bring in to the district?
$1 million.
Approximately, a little less, but it's about $997,000, but $1 million.
Okay. Fair enough. And you talked about you wanted to do 5-year planning or long-term planning. Why is that a process that started now?
We've been, look, I mean, I've been pushing it for 5 years, so I've taken stabs at my own models, Ms. Penza put together a model 2 years ago, and, we can work on the expense side. We've interviewed with a third-party company to put forward a model. I've talked to folks that I know that do this for a living and asked them if they wouldn't mind coming forward and helping us out. And we have a new assistant business manager that we hired this year who, once we believe that he kind of gets his feet wet, can take some more of the day-to-day responsibilities that Ms. Penza is doing now. And our goal is to roll out some sort of, we're going to look at this again in the spring and roll out some sort of multi-year pro forma going forward so that we can incorporate that as part of our 1-year budget. So you have your 1-year budget, you have a 5 or 7-year projection, and we can look at PSERS, we can look at insurance, we can look at all our contractual obligations and model that all in there and set it up in such a way that you can do sensitivity analysis as well. And you can say, look, if we tickle this root here, how much does that branch swing in our budget? And if you reduce expenses in this one category by 1%, what does that lead here? If we increase taxes by $500,000, what does that lead for us in terms of revenues out there? Yeah, we're definitely trying to get there.
I think the lot. Sorry.
I was just going to say, and I could be wrong on this. One thing with the activities, from what I understand with our coaches, with some of the sports, is the coaches that work, I think, and please correct me, if they work for the school, they have a certain pay scale that's different. Like, we can't just have a bunch of volunteers come in and do...
No, what you're saying is that the coaches are in the contract.
Yeah, the coaches in the contract,
they don't have to be employed
or not.
They don't have to be a teacher in the district, but it's in the contract.
There's certain, my wife's the head softball coach and coaches at the school. X amount of the positions are paid by the school district, and there's some that are volunteers or paid by fundraising.
But just for like Tracy's position, the head softball coach, because it's a contractual position, we cannot put a volunteer in it.
That's the point.
Or by
our assistant coaches can be volunteers.
Correct. Because they're not in the contract.
Correct. But if they're in the contract, they have to be
we only get $2,000 though. Isn't there a certain step up?
Yes.
Correct.
It's based on years of experience.
There's a formula.
Experience and
there's different levels of the coaches, and there's different numbers of years.
But again, what Mr. Sheen is saying, the head coach you cannot ask a volunteer to do it. It's in the teacher's contract right now.
I think for everyone, we should get the word out because the retirement fund is the problem, not just here. It's across the state.
Correct.
I've been reading a lot of stuff on it, and my parents are 45-year teachers, both in the state of Kansas, and they have the same issues there. So it's something we have to hit the government up. We can't really bash you guys for that because that's just something that's there. So we need to hit the state. We need to do all we can to get that done. There's not going to be a change unless that happens because next year, I thought 2 years ago when we started talking about some of the cuts, last year when they started talking about cuts in the middle school athletics, we were at the bottom. And this year it's kindergarten. What's next year? What else can we? I don't. Look, you're trimming this about as much as you can trim.
Everything's this year, next year. Like I said, we will be out of fund balance. We will not have transportation. You will not have kindergarten. You will not have sports. And the reason for that is because our expenses, our other obligations are increasing faster than you can possibly raise revenue for.
Next year there are no no.
No, I was saying we're at the bottom. I mean, this
there are
is
no
it.
other levels to pull next year.
Well, and that's what, I mean, maybe I'm optimistic, but I really think taking all these problems and writing them all down and figuring out what they cost, if somehow we can sit down and restructure, maybe there's a way to save some of this for the long haul rather than just cutting. Maybe there is a way to restructure something. Maybe we can look at outside sources to help us. That's what I'm saying. I feel like, this is a challenge, but it's not something that we can't embrace and try to fix it a little bit. We may not be able to fix everything, but there might be some things in here that we could fix and keep rather than just cutting. So, I mean, maybe that sounds like pie in the sky, but I think this is something, it's a challenge, but it's something we can maybe restructure.
I think the more information is out there for everybody. I'm very much about not wanting taxes raised, but I also realize that there's sacrifices we're going to make. And I think there's more people out there that will be willing to look at it. They have everything in their hands.
One thing I'd say, I do agree with you about sports. You're right. Kids won't get into college.
It's like sports.
Correct, and I agree with all that. And the other side of the coin is, after tonight, the next meeting, you could see a whole group of people with kids at 4 years old saying, how are you going to get rid of kindergarten? So we're caught between a rock and a hard place because you're right. What do I do? What do we do? Do we get rid of kindergarten or do we get rid of sports? And I'm going to have a group of parents in here for one, and a group of parents in the other. But it's a tough decision.
But I think from the philosophy of a school is to matriculate the kids to the next level, which is up through college. And I don't think you're going to have if you have a school that says you did the 5 basic classes. You have kindergarten. Well, we're not going to hold kindergarten against you because that. And
again, I'm not arguing with you, but I can have a group of parents saying, "Listen, if you don't kindergarten, I'm going somewhere else. I'm not going to move in your district. My kids can be behind the 8 ball in first grade. I mean, we're going to have this. And I'm not saying you're right or wrong. I'm just saying we're going to have the other side of the coin too. So this is a dilemma that we have to face on both sides. I mean, it's not just the end; it's also the beginning of their education.
It's a dilemma I think the whole town, the district is facing.
Oh, absolutely.
We're here to work.
So that's great.
All these conversations, I just want to throw something. All these conversations we've been having about our contractual obligations and teachers' contracts or whatever. I don't want us to portray some negative message there. I mean, I've got 4 kids that have gone through the school district. 2 of them are out. One's about to graduate. I still have another one in, and they've had nothing but phenomenal teachers the whole time. I mean, that's what got them to college. That's got them where that's a big asset for us as our teachers.
Absolutely.
All we're saying is these are contracts that are out there that we all have to work together and look at them and see if collectively we can come to a way to save as much as we can.
Yeah,
I don't want a negative message getting put out there, and I can see the frustration on some faces there that you may think that way.
I think the last thing we need to do
we're not. We're trying to save everybody. We're trying to save everything.
But I think
both my parents were teachers, so I lived this all my life.
But I think, and again, I think Mr. Basil's right. We have to look at everything. Again, we can't focus on one area. There are those 4 levers that Mr. Basil said. We have to look at all 4 to make it equal. So, I mean, it's going to be one of those things. We're just asking for everybody to get together and help us. And, we can't, like Mr. Simonero said, can't just say it's the contractions. It is, but it's the biggest one, but it's not the only one we have to look at.
Then I'll leave. This may not be legally able to be done as we enforced, we enacted activity fees, and to kind of help with people who don't have kids in school. That's the biggest one. People are going to argue that I don't have kids in school. Why should I have taxes raised? Is there any legal way the state allows that if you do have kids in school, they pay a school fee?
We already do.
We're doing it for extracurriculars, for things that are not extracurricular, since extracurricular activities from a legal standpoint are not part of the school code, but anything that's contained in the school code that a student's required to do, you can't be charged beyond the property tax.
It's $150 for the first activity.
Oh yeah. I pay my
$500 maximum. Believe me, I've been to the max.
Your question is,
people who have the means are more than willing to make donations, though. We've tried that. We instituted Adopt a Program initiative a couple of years ago to try to inspire either groups or businesses or individuals to say, I want to earmark a donation for this program. I want to give you $50 or $100, or a business might say, I'll give you $1,000, but I want it to go toward, they can be as specific as they want. I want it to go toward elementary band.
And the group did step up and paid for one of the activities.
Yeah,
correct.
I mean, we also started a foundation this year, specifically in mind that to allow some programs to be augmented by money that companies would donate. So we were trying different ways to raise money to, because
Have we ever considered the reverse? I know some school districts are offering volunteer opportunities for senior citizens to come into the school to work off some of their taxes.
Correct.
You know, we're depleted the aid support. Is that something we could consider for those elderly who are struggling?
We have a program here for that.
We do. The only problem with that, and we've encountered in the past, and we've done it again 5-6 years ago, you can't count on the volunteer. It's exactly what it is. It's a volunteer. So if you have so-and-so, you have 5 different volunteers Monday through Friday, first...
I don't mean to put them in some
No, I understand, but and it's a, and again...
Once they put in so many hours, then they get a
correct.
reduction.
Again, the problem, again, we have, again, prior years, and I'm not, again, it's worth looking into, is the first snowfall, they're not going out.
Yeah, but again, Mr. McCullough, the issue you have is if it's a position that is already contracted.
Then that's another issue.
I don't mean to fill a position.
Right.
I
No,
just
no.
need to get people in.
Right.
Correct.
I mean, that's part of the problem. You're going to come back and say, wait a second, you laid off 38 aides last year, but now you got teachers, you got elderly taking those positions.
Correct. No, your point is...
Qualified to take a position.
No, your point is, yeah, and it was done again, but in the past, it's a volunteer, so teachers can't rely on a volunteer. That's the only problem with that was, and that's why we kind of are actually a former assistant superintendent. That's why she kind of started to restrict that, is because you would thought you were going to get a volunteer or 2 volunteers on a day, and then you didn't.
But I think what she said, correct me if I'm wrong, if they come and show up, they might get a voucher for a tax credit.
That was discussed before.
We've had that program. The problem is you don't get participation.
You don't get, yeah, that's the problem. But again, it's worth looking into again, but it has been tried.
I never knew we did that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we did that. Okay, go ahead, sir. I'm sorry.
How you doing? I'm Brian Noga, 356 Rosecliff Drive in Douglasville. Like I said, this is the first meeting I've been to. I don't really have a special needs kid and everything. So I'm probably not even in the sports category. But if we don't, just in general, first of all, I want to just, you guys have a rough job. You can't win anyway. But to get rid of the teachers and to keep cutting the teachers, I realize that they're 77%. But of your makeup, but that would be like a hospital that doesn't have nurses and doctors, and then call it a hospital. Then you go to get care, and nobody's there to help you. That's kind of, I think, what we're looking at here with the teachers. If we don't start giving the teachers, at least keeping them and not keep cutting them, we're going to have a school with a bunch of students and babysitters instead of people teaching our kids what they need to know. And also on the whole school, or the whole sports thing, it's $400,000. We don't have the breakup, because you guys said you're going to get the numbers of the sports that bring in the money and how close they actually get to breaking even, we'll call it. I said, no, I know. I said, how close we'll get to breaking even. I mean, are we talking hundreds of dollars? Or are we talking
thousands of dollars?
The biggest one, wait, all right, that's fine. But here's my point. If these kids don't have anything else to do, forget about college. Let's say nobody wants to go to college anymore. We're just going to all be trashmen. Correct. Not that that's a bad deal. Just saying, for example. These kids are going to run and pillage the streets after school, and when some of these people that have nice houses, or you have a not so nice house, start tearing these places apart, that is what's going to happen to this community. We're going to have no sports, we're going to have bad teachers, and then we're going to have a bunch of people living here with teenage kids pillaging the village. Correct. That's what we're going to end up having if we get rid of these.
You're right. We lose sleep constantly.
Absolutely.
On these issues. We talk about it all the time.
Here's the other thing.
You're absolutely right.
Well, sir, here's the other thing is, and it was brought up tonight, we spent $3 million on the stadium, and we're actually going to close it 2 years after we open it? I mean, but what I'm trying to say is, I agree with you. What I'm trying to say, sir, is that you're right. Sports is very important. That's the dilemma we think, and Mr. Seminara is going to say, is we think about, I mean, I'm up like he is that night thinking about how to do this. I mean, again, we just spent a considerable amount of money in hoping to keep all these programs. 2 years later, now we're like, oh my God, when I was sitting here going, you're actually thinking about discussing this and getting rid of it? I mean, it's hard for me to even think about this.
Well, it's no different than somebody who you take a credit card and you max it out, and then you wonder how you're going to pay off the credit card bill. That's what this school district did. Okay, we've maxed out our credit card bill, and now we're trying to figure out how our revenue is going to catch up, and it won't. And so the issue isn't whether or not we want to get rid of kindergarten, or whether we want to get rid of sports, or whether we want to get rid of clubs, transportation. Nobody wants to do any of these things. The issue is, those are the things that we can touch. Okay?
I hope I don't offend you with this.
No. I'm just trying to explain to you. I'm just trying to explain to you. Nobody disagrees with what you're saying. All we're saying is that as a school district, there's only so many things on that pie chart that we can touch to balance the budget. Okay? Salaries and benefits are out of our control. Okay? Contracted services, with the exception of transportation, is out of our control. Finance is out of our control. When you get into the little slivers in here, like other objects or whatever, things that are like 1%, those are levers that we can touch. That's why they're on the table.
I understand that.
And that's the exact reason I asked, what happens if we decide, even if this gets done, and this is all we can do, and we say no?
Well, then what happens is 10 people petition the Commonwealth, and 9 new people get to sit up here and deal with the same problem.
I don't want the first district of Pennsylvania to have that done to.
Well, I for one. My thing is, I don't think Mr. Bogdan, when he says about his credit card, see, here's the issue. Everybody has Visas over here, right? And everybody has Visa credit cards here. But he has a MasterCard. Because, let's be honest, he doesn't even send his kids to this school district. All right? So he's using a Visa. And we're all using MasterCards here. So there's two totally different things. He doesn't want to raise the taxes because he lives in a nice big house. He doesn't want to have to pay more. Let's be honest.
Okay, sir.
It's not going to help anybody.
So that's okay.
I know it. I'm just saying.
I think that's a very
Isn't that an issue?
I think that's a very unfair statement.
All right. I'm going to address this. I'm going to address this right now because no. I want to address this. My family has lived in this district for more than 40 years. Okay. My family went to this school. I've got cousins, I've got nieces, I've got nephews, all in this school district.
Sure.
Okay? I support this school district. I spent 5 years of my life in here trying to solve the problems of this school district. I've donated money to this school district. I pay my taxes to this school district. And quite frankly, sir, I'm offended by your comments.
I'm just saying.
I don't care what you're saying. What I'm saying is this school district is supported by every single taxpayer in this school district, whether or not they have kids in this school, they have kids at all, or they're senior citizens, or their kids have grown and gone.
Sure.
Everybody contributes.
Okay. That's fine.
So to sit there and pontificate to everyone else here that because your kids don't go to a school, or your kids graduated from a school and aren't here anymore, and you don't have a standing, is absolutely bullshit.
That's why I'm allowed to be.
Okay, excuse me. I think we're going off track.
Calm it down. No, it's fine. I'm just.
Listen, it's a personal choice. There's no difference between one of us deciding to send our kids to a Catholic school or a private school. Mr. Basil, it's a personal choice. He does not, in my opinion, does not defend himself to anybody.
I'm not saying
it's his choice.
I'm just saying I think
that's exactly what you said.
No, wait, let me finish. And the other thing is, if people had a major problem with it, again, I'm whatever. Mr. Basil's up for election. People in his district were fine with him representing them. Again, that's their decision, so let it go.
I'm not saying
it's his personal choice.
I'm just saying it's different when you have kids in the school versus not in the school.
It's not different.
Again, it's not different. But you know what?
He's 1 of 9, though.
He's 1 of 9.
Look, it doesn't make a difference.
That's all I'm saying.
It doesn't matter.
Whether I got kids in this school district or I don't have kids in this school district, I still care about the kids in this school.
That's why he's 1 of 9. If we did not agree on the direction that he wanted to go,
I'm not saying he's doing a bad job.
I know.
I'm not saying.
Okay. You know what, Mr. Sheen, we're going to recess soon. Okay, let it go.
Sit down.
Let it go.
What's that?
You need to sit down.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Any other comment?
But wait, before Mr. Schatt, is there anybody else?
Okay, Mr. Schatt, one more time, and then we'll call it an evening.
The Tom Schatt, 729 2nd Street. The 1.27 millage, which is your maximum without a referendum.
That's correct.
Correct.
Would produce $1.2 million approximately.
$1.25 million approximately.
Understanding that those referendum are the numbers from last year because I don't know what they
So
are.
they're close.
My question is, what you had over here in the overhead and you went through in the beginning, what millage increase is in there to balance it?
1.27 mil.
All of it.
The whole thing.
All of it.
The whole thing.
I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, right here.
What's being proposed is a maximum increase in taxes
I understand that.
and almost an equal amount of use of fund balance.
The first 3 numbers in that chart, for those of you that are listening to Mr. Schatt's comment, represent the maximum tax dollars that the district could access if they chose to.
The Constitution of Pennsylvania, I believe, states that the legislature is supposed to run a thorough and efficient public education system. Is that the language?
That is correct.
That is correct.
And a few other words, but not much more than that.
And all of you took the oath to abide by the Constitution of Pennsylvania a few days ago.
Define fair.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
I think part of the problem is that we have the most conservative governor that we've had in the last 30 years, particularly regarding education. I think that's the main problem.
Who was a former teacher, by the way.
However, I need a clarification, Mr. Basil, on an earlier comment you made about 10 years in a row the board has raised at maximum. Is that your comment or not?
No. I'll qualify that if you want. No, I have the tax rates.
I just want to know what your comment was.
I said over the last 10 years, our taxes went from 0.175 mils to...
We used the word 10 years in a row.
I don't know, but no, we did not raise.
We recorded the meeting, so you can listen to the recording and get the exact.
No, over the past 10 years, we have not raised to the maximum every year. I know that.
Right.
I know that.
But we have raised taxes.
2 of the last 4, we haven't raised taxes.
Right. 2 of the last 4, we did not do any.
But I heard. Maybe I heard something about 10 years in a row.
No.
I can't remember exactly what I said. What's your point, Mr. Schott?
The point was that wasn't a correct statement.
Well, the tax record speaks for itself.
Okay.
And again, just to clarify,
I don't know what his point is.
No, his point is
the tax record speaks for itself.
No, what he's saying is that every year we raise the. He's saying that you said we raised to the maximum every year for the last 10 years. That is not correct. There were a couple
we
years.
We did not raise taxes last year.
There were years that we did a 0.25%, or some years we did less.
2009 and last year were the only 2 years we have not raised taxes in the last 10 years.
And there are some that we did not raise to the max.
And if you go back 10 years.
Correct.
Well, remember, there wasn't an Act 1 index.
Right.
Correct.
So there was no limit.
Correct.
There was no limit.
Correct.
No.
There was no limit.
There was no limit.
Right.
Correct.
That's right.
That's all I was good.
When you had the Act 1 index was put in place, you had a limit placed on how high you could raise taxes.
That in
06.
Prior to that, school boards could raise it.
Anything.
Whatever they chose.
Correct.
The other thing, other than possibly selling the stadium, which I suggested, maybe it's time to talk to surrounding districts about looking into mergers to protect, to get some programs saved. That's all I'm saying. Maybe it's time to talk to Exeter or Twin Valley, whoever abuts us, and say maybe it's time to sit down and get together. And I'm just saying, I understand that's a long way down the road. Maybe you want to look at everything and you want to look outside the box, which you've talked about. Maybe that's something you got to look at. That's all I'm saying. I would hope, and I appreciate, Mr. Basil, you running the meeting tonight, allowing people to speak. And at every meeting that I've attended, except one last year, public was allowed to speak. And I hope your future...
No, I
hope your future meetings, you can restrict these to 3 minutes or 1 minute or 2 minutes. The one last year that I didn't know was announced.
Yeah, Mr. Stratton, time's up.
That I didn't know was announced.
You used 2 times, by the way, 6 minutes.
And the last thing I have to say is, you made the comment, Mr. Basil, that we've maxed out the credit card. Okay? Maxing out the credit card would have meant last year. You could have. It was not the desire of the board to do it. But you could have last year raised it to 1.2 or something like that, whatever it was. And the board made that decision not to. So it wasn't that you were forced maxed out. It's a political or economic decision that the vast majority, if not everybody,
no, not everybody,
all but one, were willing to look at. And when I
let me qualify that statement. When I say you max out the credit card, that's an expense side. You're talking about revenues. Maxing out a credit card is spending money.
Yes. And when you look at balancing budgets, Mr. Basil, you should be looking at both.
I know quite a bit about balancing budgets.
And when you're balancing
what
budgets,
we have is
should we be looking at both?
We should look at both revenues and expenses.
And you did last year look at
Yes, we did look at revenues.
Well, there weren't enough people on the board to get it passed. Because I read this fair and efficient last year, and I stood up and said, I'm looking at this board as you're looking at efficient. What can you cut? And that's what I said. Now you can go back and, because I did say that.
Well, I've got the tax records for the last, going back to 1996. In 1996, taxes were raised 3.85%. In 1997, they were raised 11.11%. In 1998, they were raised 11.67%. In 1999, 0. In 2000, 3%. In 2001, 2.9%. In 2002, 7.4%. In 2003, 7.89%. 2004, 7.32%. Now this is before the index, but these look like pretty high numbers to me in terms of tax increases. In 2005, 11.6% increase in taxes. In 2006, 3%. 2007, 4%. 2008, 5.33%. The next tax goose egg was in 2009. It was the first time in 10 years the school district did not raise taxes. In 2010, 2.79%. In 2011, 1.9%. Last year, 0. That's where the taxes are. The tax record speaks for itself.
And the other record that speaks for itself is that you had a great increase in enrollment, which meant during those times you had to hire staff and you had to build buildings. Isn't that correct?
One would question that.
Correct?
Yeah, we had an increase in enrollment,
and you had an increase.
And one would question whether or not we had to actually increase our buildings.
Well, it's the amount of money that was spent is where I always. That's what I always look. It's the reason why I came on the board 3 years ago, because I think that money could have been spent or managed much better. You're right. There's both sides of the fence. There's the revenue and the expense side. I think the expense side was mismanaged, and here we are. Here we are stuck with that. We spent too much money. We didn't need to spend as much money as we spent on that middle school. We didn't need to spend as much money as we did on that track, that stadium. It's champagne taste on a beer budget.
But to stay current with
so now we got to raise taxes every year to pay for that.
But to stay current with what's right here, if you would have raised that minimally last year, which I wanted to do, I stood, and I was probably the only one that said that. There were very few last year that stood up and said that. You wouldn't be as deep. Would it have been solved? No. And in 2009, if that would have been raised 0.4 mils, and that would have been in there, that could have saved full-day kindergarten.
Yeah, and I could have showed you the people who lost their homes because of that.
Mr. Schatt, I mean, the other side of the argument, and you're entitled to your opinion, I respect it. I'm just saying the other side of the argument is all those years when the school district was raising taxes 11, 8, 9%, okay, you're throwing surpluses. One year they gave back $1 million. $700,000 because they raised taxes too much. Is that fiscally responsible to overtax people when you don't need the money? And now when you do need the money, people can't afford it. If we were at, take a hypothetical, if we hadn't raised taxes that fast, that quickly, maybe we would be sitting at 24 or 23 mils or 25 mils instead of 29. And it's a little bit more palatable for someone to take a tax increase because they can afford it. Now you get people at the edge of the ownership of their homes. They can't afford it anymore. So this board collectively came to a consensus last year. We're going to spend down this fund balance that we've been holding for years and years and years and try to lessen that blow to the taxpayer who lost their job or is sitting on fixed income, knowing that sooner or later taxes are going to have to be part of that equation again. And here they are. They're part of the equation.
Thorough and efficient. It's supposed to be your job.
I believe
and the state legislature's job. And the governor's job. Not just efficient. In the last couple of years, in my opinion, the majority of the board has been looking at efficient, and not thorough. These cuts that are up here are going to devastate the district, are going to, and I agree with some people said, they're not going to move here. The value of the homes are going to go down. So your revenues are going to decrease. People are going to ask to have their houses reassessed. I'm telling you, that's where you're headed.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you at all. okay? And we've got expenses that we've got to get under control, and we've got revenues that also have to come into play to balance the budget. That's where we're at. And everybody has to participate in that, Mr. Schott. Everybody. All the stakeholders in the school district have to participate. Taxpayers, employees.
But that wasn't the attitude of the majority of the board
Yes, it
last
was.
year.
It was the attitude of the board last year.
Last year, when you could have, what was it, a 0.4 mil? Is that what it was at the last second, then it went to 0? Isn't that correct?
I don't think it was ever on the table.
Right at the end, there was going to be an increase.
Final,
No,
yeah.
We had a placeholder.
No increase.
We had a placeholder.
I don't know at this time.
And we took it off the table.
Right at the last moment, it was taken off the table, because I expected it to be 0.4. Isn't that what it was?
Somewhere around there.
Yeah,
Yes.
and then all of a sudden it went to 0. And all I'm saying is, you wouldn't be in as deep as hole. It wouldn't have solved that. I understand it wouldn't have solved it. But if everybody's to be a stakeholder, you took somebody out of that last year by keeping that at 0.
Taxpayers weren't the only ones that did not participate last year. I'm just saying, if you're going to sit there and have the argument that all 4 levers need to be pulled to balance the budget and the community needs to come together, then all 4 levers need to be pulled and then have the community needs to come together.
To the teachers union,
I'm referring to all of our contractual partners, sir. I'm not singling anybody out.
All right, let me give this. When did the teachers give it back? Was it 2 years ago?
Yeah, 2 years ago.
And was it $1 million?
Roughly.
Is that right? And I stood up at the podium, and you disagreed with me, and you're probably going to disagree with me now.
If I disagree with you, then that's probably
true. But the base was moved $1 million. And over a 5-year period, that base has been lowered by $5 million. It's $1 million every year. And you can twist the language any way you want, Mr. Basil, but that's the truth.
Okay. All right. I appreciate your opinion, Mr. Schott, as always, and welcome you to all these discussions.
It's 28 hours.
Yeah, okay. Right. Look, I hope everybody got their say tonight. It's not fun. We will have more budget meetings going forward. And although going forward, we'll have to just let everyone know we will limit the discussion of each individual person at the podium to 3 minutes. That way we're not spending a lot of time here with these things. But, well, initial blush through. I think it was important for people to get their messages out.
Mr. Kurtz awake?
Are we done?
Mr. Kurtz?
Oh, this meeting's adjourned.
I'm here.
Okay, we're adjourning.
All right. Good night.
Thanks, Connor. Bang the gavel, Andrew, for the record. Meeting adjourned, 9:27.
Hey.